I am Jianlong. The woman I have loved for 4 years is now laughing at me as trash with her friends in KTV. I am walking alone on the street, feeling disheartened. Suddenly, I found a young girl in a trash can. She not only asked me for help, but also asked me to take her in. Then a group of strong men in black approached, and she hid in my arms. This put me in a dilemma, faced with these fierce, strong men in black. Should I save her? Chapter 1. After being laughed at, I picked up a beautiful woman on the side of the road. It was raining heavily. Jiang Long stood alone on the street, holding the black umbrella in his hand. The rain slid down his cheeks, his clothes were already soaked, and the chill in his heart was more biting than the rain outside. The words he heard at the door of the KTV box kept echoing in his mind. Yao Yao, Jiang Long is really obedient. In this heavy rain, you asked him to bring an umbrella, and he really came. I saw him. You asked him to go east, but he didn't dare to go west. Ah, yeah, he's like a dog. Then Yao Yao, do you like him or not? How is that possible? But he's all around me. There's nothing I can do. The laughter coming from the box made Jiang Long feel like he was falling into an icy cave. He stood at the door. His heart seemed to be cut by countless sharp blades, and every word made him on the verge of collapse. Jiang Long has loved Qinya for 4 years. For 4 years, he has been with her without regrets, following her and helping her solve various problems. He thought he was special and that she had at least some different feelings for him. But all this was just his fantasy. He was just a licking dog that she could command at will. The ridicule of Qinya and her friends mercilessly hurt his heart. He clenched the pink umbrella in his hand and finally threw it into the trash can with a wry smile. Jiang Long was about to leave when a panicked girl suddenly jumped out of the trash can and accidentally bumped into Jiang Long's arms. She was thin and helpless, with wet hair sticking to her cheeks, and her voice trembled. I'm sorry, little brother, please save me. Her eyes were full of fear, and before Jiang Long could react, she had already grabbed his hand, tears flashing in her eyes. Before Jiang Long could ask, a group of strong men in black quickly approached. The girl hurriedly hid in Jiang Long's arms and whispered, Open the umbrella quickly. Don't let them see me. Jiang Long was stunned for a moment, but he finally opened the umbrella and protected her in his arms. The men in black ran past them quickly, and the girl huddled in his chest nervously and only breathed a sigh of relief when the group of people left. She apologized shyly. I just offended you. Jiang Long nodded to indicate that it was okay, handed her the umbrella and coat, and turned to leave. However, the girl caught up with him again and grabbed his arm with tears in her eyes. Little brother, I am homeless. Can you take me in? Jiang Long was stunned. Seeing her helpless appearance, his heart softened. After a moment of silence, he sighed and said helplessly, Okay, come with me. Chapter 2. I am homeless now. Can you take me in? In the rainy night, the two were so close that their noses almost touched. Jiang Long's pupil shrank, and when he realized this, he hurriedly tried to step back to create some distance. However, the girl grabbed his t-shirt tightly and begged in a low voice. Little brother, don't move. They are coming soon. The warm breath of the girl hit Jiang Long's face, making him feel uncomfortable, but he did not move. Their bodies were pressed together, and Jiang Long could clearly feel the softness of her chest. He realized that if he lowered his head a little more, their lips would touch. At this moment, their posture looked like a couple hugging in the rain to outsiders. Jiang Long saw 4 men in black running past them. His heart tightened. Could it be that these people were chasing the girl? Time seemed to freeze, and only when a man in black walked away did the girl breathe a sigh of relief, take a step back, and pat her chest. Her face suddenly became hot, and she apologized to Jiang Long a little embarrassedly. I was in a hurry just now, and I offended you. Please forgive me. Jiang Long glanced at her calmly and said, softly, without saying anything more. The girl then looked carefully at the man in front of her. He was tall and handsome, like the protagonist from a comic book. However, Jiang Long's eyes soon fell on the girl's wet clothes. The color of her underwear was faintly visible, and there was even lace. His expression remained unchanged, and he quickly looked away, deciding to be a good person to the end. He handed the umbrella in his hand to the girl and took off his coat and put it on her. Here are the umbrella and coat for you. Goodbye. Jiang Long left a word, turned around, and disappeared in the rain. The heaviness in his heart was inexplicably relieved after the incident. However, the doubts about the man in black still lingered in his mind. But he quickly shook his head, thinking that it had nothing to do with him and he had done his best. Qinya appeared on the screen. Jiang Long stared at the screen, but for the first time in his life, he did not answer it, letting the ringing sound fade away in the rain. When he was about to continue walking, he suddenly felt a cold touch on his arm. Jiang Long turned his head and saw that the girl had appeared beside him again and reached out to grab his arm. She smiled awkwardly and said, "Little brother, thank you for giving me the umbrella and coat just now." Jiang Long was puzzled and frowned and asked, "Why are you following me?" The girl blinked her big eyes, with an embarrassed look on her face. After a moment of silence, tears welled up in her eyes, as if she had suffered a great injustice. Jiang Long sighed and softened his tone and asked, "Can you tell me why you followed me?" The girl sniffed and finally spoke. "Little brother, I am homeless now. Can you take me in?" Jiang Long was stunned, his mind in a mess. How could she say such a thing to a stranger? He said with a hint of warning, "We are strangers. You can't just go home with a strange man." There was a gleam of grievance in the girl's eyes, but she said firmly, "I know you are a good person." Jiang Long shook his head helplessly. Bad guys don't write bad guy on their faces. The girl cleverly asked back, "So, little brother, are you a bad guy?" Jiang Long blurted out, "I am not." "That's good. Take me home." She still had a hint of playfulness and pleading in her tone. Jiang Long sighed and thought, "What is this?" He was about to refuse, but couldn't help asking those men in black, "Why did they arrest you?" The girl hesitated for a moment and whispered, "My family wanted me to marry an old man, but I didn't want to, so I ran away. Those men in black were sent by my family to catch me. If I were caught, I would have to marry that man who is older than my father." The girl's words stirred Jiang Long's heart. Seeing her tighten her coat and shiver in the cold wind, Jiang Long finally softened his heart. After thinking for a moment, he said helplessly, "Come with me." Chapter 3: Encounter on a Rainy Night. Complicated ambiguity and misunderstanding. Under the umbrella, Jiang Long and the girl walked side by side, suspicious of each other. Jiang Long doubted the truthfulness of the girl's words, but felt that she had not lied to him about anything worth worrying about. Soon, they arrived at Jiang Long's rental house. At the entrance, Jiang Long casually found a pair of slippers and handed them to the girl. "Wear these first. There are no women's ones." The girl nodded in thanks, took off her soaked leather shoes, put on big slippers, and began to look around the room. Jiang Long noticed that her black silk feet were wearing his slippers and felt strange. After changing into slippers, Jiang Long walked into the bedroom, found a bath towel, t-shirt, and sweatpants, and handed them to the girl. "Go take a shower. Don't catch a cold." The girl happily took the clothes and was about to go into the bathroom when Jiang Long suddenly stopped her. "Well, I don't have any underwear. But if you don't mind, I have extra underwear." The girl blushed instantly when she heard this and shook her head in panic to refuse. "No need." Then she rushed into the bathroom quickly with her clothes. 20 minutes later, the girl came out of the shower, her wet hair draped over her shoulders, her black t-shirt and gray sweatpants looking loose and empty. She smiled sweetly and said to Jiang Long, "Little brother, you should go take a shower too." Jiang Long hurried into the bathroom, but just as he took off his clothes, there was a knock on the door. Outside the bathroom, the girl's voice came, "Little brother, open the door. I have something to do." Jiang Long's mind was in a mess and his heartbeat accelerated. Could it be that she had some idea about him? Thinking of those bad possibilities, he quickly put on his clothes and opened the door a crack. The girl came in all of a sudden, picked up something, and immediately ran out again, not forgetting to close the door. "Go wash up. I won't bother you anymore." Jiang Long was stunned, then realized that she came back to get something, and he was relieved. After taking a shower, he turned on the washing machine to wash clothes and saw the girl's white shirt, pleated skirt, and the conspicuous long stockings lying inside. He touched his nose awkwardly. Chapter 4: Unexpected Misunderstanding and Truth. Jiang Long looked at the long socks in the basin, rubbed his chin, and thought about it. He finally decided to throw his clothes into the washing machine and wash them together to avoid wasting water. After a while, the washing machine finished its work, and he put the washed clothes into a basin and took them out of the bathroom. The moment Jiang Long walked out of the bathroom, the girl seemed a little flustered and quickly hid the things in her hand behind her. Jiang Long's mouth twitched slightly, and he couldn't help laughing in his heart. She thought I didn't see it? His naked eye vision is 2.0, and his eyesight is very good. "I'll wash your clothes as well." Jiang Long walked towards the balcony and said casually as he passed by the girl, "Ah, thank you." The girl was stunned for a moment, frowning slightly. She remembered that she had washed the clothes before. Why were they washed again? Jiang Long stood on the balcony, looking down at the last pair of black stockings in the basin, frowning. He reached out and took the socks out, and after a closer look, he found that there was a large scratch on the socks that were originally in good condition. Looking at the long scratch, he couldn't help but doubt himself. Could it be that when I was washing clothes, the zipper of my pants got tangled with the socks and ended up tearing them? He smiled bitterly, thinking that he had meant well to help, but he ended up ruining someone's socks. He scratched his head and held up the black stockings helplessly. At most, he could just compensate her with one pair, which would be fine. After all, he had ruined them by accident. Jiang Long walked out of the balcony, holding the torn socks in his hand. At this time, the girl had already changed her clothes in the bathroom. Although the clothes were a little damp and uncomfortable to wear, it was better than nothing. She thought that after a while, as her body temperature rose, the clothes should be better. However, she couldn't wear her underwear. After blowing it for a long time, it still didn't dry completely. She could only hang it in a corner of the bathroom for the time being. When she saw Jiang Long standing in the living room with her stockings in his hand, she instantly became ashamed and angry. She strode forward and angrily snatched the socks from Jiang Long's hand, her eyes wide open, and her tone full of questions. "What are you doing with my stockings?" Just now she thought this little brother was nice, but now she thinks he might be a pervert. She was panicking. Is it unsafe to stay here? The girl's eyes were suddenly full of vigilance. Seeing her reaction, Jiang Long immediately realized that she had misunderstood and hurriedly explained, "No, it's not what you think. Your, your socks may have been scratched by the zipper of my pants in the washing machine. You see, they can't be worn anymore." After hearing this, the girl lowered her head and carefully looked at the socks in her hand. As expected, the socks were already torn and could no longer be worn. She suddenly realized that she had misunderstood Jiang Long, and she was relieved. She almost thought he was a pervert because of this misunderstanding. The girl's vigilance gradually faded. Although she felt a little embarrassed, she felt relieved. She couldn't help but sigh to herself. It seems that I was still too worried. This little brother is indeed a good person. "Oh, sorry, I misunderstood you," she said softly, and threw the damaged socks into the trash can next to her. Jiang Long scratched his head helplessly, still feeling a little guilty, and said sincerely, "I'm so sorry. I'll buy you a new one tomorrow." The girl waved her hand and said with a smile, "No, it's really okay. Don't take it to heart." After that, she walked to the sofa and sat down, feeling completely relaxed. Jiang Long secretly made up his mind that he must buy her a new pair of socks tomorrow. After all, he was the one who broke them, so he had to make up for it. Neither of them spoke again. The atmosphere gradually became relaxed, and the girl's vigilance towards Jiang Long completely dissipated. "Brother, please sit down." The girl unceremoniously moved her body to make some space on the sofa. Jiang Long hesitated for a moment, and originally wanted to move a stool to sit farther away. After all, he was not familiar with the girl, but since she offered her seat, he sat down. However, Jiang Long still deliberately kept some distance. He looked at the girl next to him, his heart full of doubts, and couldn't help asking, "What's your name?" The girl turned her head to look at him and said calmly, "Susan-san." "How big?" Jiang Long asked. Susan's eyes moved flexibly, as if she was thinking about something, and then she answered casually, 17 years old. Jiang Long's pupil shrank suddenly when he heard this, and his heart was instantly filled with doubts. How could a 17-year-old girl be out alone? And she didn't look like that at all. He stroked his hair, frowning, obviously not believing the number, and asked again, "Are you sure? Really 17 years old?" Susan held back her smile, but pretended to be calm. "Of course, I'm telling the truth." Jiang Long was still confused. How could her family allow a 17-year-old girl to live outside if she was not yet an adult? Not to mention her independent attitude, which seemed very mature. He looked at Susan with some uneasiness, and his heart was full of doubts. Susan seemed to sense Jiang Long's distrust, and she secretly groaned inwardly, her toes unconsciously shrinking in her pink slippers. Oops, it seems that this lie was not perfect enough. She regretted it a little, but now that it was out, she could only bite the bullet and continue. Jiang Long still looked at her suspiciously. Although he did not ask any more questions, his doubts did not dissipate. He felt that Susan did not tell him the truth, and that this girl seemed to have too many secrets hidden in her heart. "Brother Jiang Long, why are you getting caught in the rain so late at night?" Su Shanshan couldn't help but ask curiously, with a searching gleam in her eyes. Jiang Long's face suddenly darkened, and his head, which was originally lowered, looked even heavier. He did not respond, as if this question touched the deepest pain in his heart. Susan looked at his silence and vaguely guessed something in her heart. Is it because of love? Susan asked tentatively. Sure enough, her words were like a needle, piercing the softest and most painful place in Jiang Long's heart. His thoughts were instantly pulled back to the name that broke his heart, Chinya, the girl he had pursued for many years, but never gave him any response. He gave everything for her and was willing to be her licker, but in return he only got a cold rejection. That feeling was like his heart was pierced by needles and bleeding. Susan was very sensitive to Jiang Long, as mood changes, and was amazed. It seemed that her guess was almost right. She moved slightly closer to Jiang Long, reached out and patted his shoulder gently, and said in a gentle tone with a little mischief, Brother Jiang Long, don't be too sad. As the saying goes, the old does not go, the new does not come. You are so handsome and kind, you will definitely meet a girl who truly loves you in the future. Jiang Long's thoughts gradually came back from his sadness when he heard her words. He looked up at Susan and felt a little comforted. Yes, why should he let someone who didn't love him control his emotions? Letting go might not be a relief. He clenched his fists, as if he had made up his mind. Thank you, Susan, Jiang Long whispered, then stood up and walked towards the bedroom. After returning to the room, he took out an old notebook from the drawer and opened the pages filled with words. It was filled with Chinyo's various preferences. Her favorite dishes, favorite fruits, clothes, favorite sports, favorite movies, and even her favorite song. These details were all collected by Jiang Long bit by bit. He devoted so much effort to her that he even wrote down every tiny habit and preference of hers. Jiang Long flipped through the book that was filled with his former infatuation, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. He had been so devoted and persistent, willing to do everything for her, but he had never received a response from her. He couldn't help but sigh at himself. Even being a licker was so conscientious. Jiang Long closed the book and took a deep breath, as if to bury all the past emotions. He knew that what was in this book was no longer the direction he should continue in the future. Susan was sitting on the sofa in the living room, thinking about things idly. Suddenly, Jiang Long rushed out of the bedroom like the wind. Chapter 5. I didn't expect that running away from home would be so difficult. Chinya returned to the graduate dormitory and sat on the bed, her arms folded across her chest, her pretty face full of displeasure. Jiang Long had clearly promised to send her an umbrella, but he suddenly disappeared and didn't answer the phone, causing her to lose face in front of her classmates. How dare he? She was filled with anger and decided to teach Jiang Long a lesson this time. If he contacts me again tomorrow, I will definitely ignore him. She secretly made up her mind to make him remember this lesson. At the same time, Jiang Long returned home, threw a quilt to Susan on the sofa, and said lightly, I'm going to sleep first. I have to go to work tomorrow. Then he went into the bedroom. Jiang Long lay on the bed, his hands behind his head, looking at the ceiling, his heart empty. Today will soon pass, and tomorrow will be a new day. He secretly warned himself that it was time to turn the page. Susan curled up on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, feeling a little uneasy. She didn't dare turn off the lights. After all, this was an unfamiliar environment, and she was in the same room with a man she had just met. She stared at the bedroom door, and after an unknown amount of time, she finally fell asleep tiredly. In the morning, Jiang Long was awakened by the alarm clock. The rain last night made him feel a little dizzy. He took a break and pushed open the bedroom door. He saw Susan curled up on the sofa, with messy hair and a childish look on her face. Half of her quilt had fallen to the ground, exposing her pink feet. Jiang Long frowned and couldn't help sighing in his heart. She's only 17 years old, but she's developed quite well. He closed the door gently, without thinking anymore, went to the bathroom to wash up, made a simple breakfast, and then rode his electric bike to work. Jiang Long works for a game development company. The boss, Lin Yuxuan, is a second-generation rich man who is a few years older than Jiang Long. Lin Yuxuan founded the company just to escape the constraints of his family. He doesn't care whether the company makes money or not. After all, his family has plenty of money. In contrast, Jiang Long, like other ordinary workers, has to work hard to make a living. As soon as Jiang Long sat down in the company, his college classmate David came over and said, Brother Long, tomorrow is Saturday. Shall we go out for a drink? Jiang Long wanted to agree, but he thought of the little girl living at home. He left a note for her in the morning, but he was not sure if she could take care of herself. I'm not going tonight. I have something to do. David looked puzzled. You want to see Chinya again? Jiang Long shook his head and said calmly, No, I will never look for her again. I have given up. His voice was frank. He had thought it through completely last night. David was so surprised that he almost jumped up. What the hell, is this true? Jiang Long nodded. Really? I should have given up long ago. I licked for 4 years and got nothing in the end. It's not worth it. David patted his shoulder heavily, almost celebrating with excitement. Brother Long, you finally figured it out. We must have a drink tonight, and you are not allowed to refuse. Jiang Long smiled helplessly and could only agree. On the other side, Susan woke up at 10 o'clock. She rubbed her head and saw a note on the coffee table. Breakfast is in the pot, and there are ingredients in the refrigerator. She curled her lips, thinking that Jiang Long's handwriting was completely inconsistent with his handsome appearance. After simply rinsing her mouth and washing her face, Susan suddenly realized that she didn't bring any toiletries or cosmetics, and her cheeks bulged with anger. I didn't expect it would be so difficult to run away from home. She sighed, turned around, and saw the pink lace underwear hanging in the corner of the bathroom, and suddenly remembered. It's over. Jiang Long must have seen it this morning. Jiang Long, who was in the company, sneezed and recalled the pink lace underwear he accidentally saw in the morning. He was very conflicted at the time, but finally reached out and hung it up again. Susan must not know about this, otherwise there will be another misunderstanding. Chapter 6. Brother Jiang Long, you are amazing. You find beauty in the ordinary. Susan walked into the kitchen and saw the hot porridge and buns in the pot, and she immediately felt warm. She was starving, so she quickly ate 3 buns and drank a bowl of porridge. After eating, she took the initiative to clean up the dishes, then took off her black t-shirt and gray sweatpants and changed into her own clothes. When she was about to put on her black stockings, she suddenly remembered the stockings that Jiang Long had damaged. She had no choice but to walk around with her 2 white and slender legs bare. Susan threw the clothes she had changed into the washing machine, intending to wash Jiang Long's clothes and return them to him. Soon after, Susan found that the clothes in the washing machine were not moving at all. She frowned and suspected that the washing machine was broken. She gently tapped the washing machine. Her mind was a mess. She had been at home since she was a child, and her clothes were washed and dried by the nanny. She had no idea that the washing machine had to be started by pressing a button. After studying it for a while, she finally understood the problem and couldn't help complaining. Jiang Long's washing machine is really backward, and you have to press a button. After hanging up the clothes, Susan turned on the TV and watched the news for a few minutes out of boredom. When she saw the news about the cooperation with Sue Group, her face darkened slightly, and then she turned off the TV with a click and fell into deep thought. Not long after, Jiang Long got off work and went home, riding his electric scooter in a hurry. Hearing the noise at the door, Su Shanshan instantly became alert and stared at the door. As soon as Jiang Long entered the room, he saw Su Shanshan sitting on the sofa, hugging her knees, staring at him intently. He accidentally saw the pink lace panties slightly exposed under her skirt, and his face suddenly became hot, his ears slightly red, and he quickly turned his head away. Su Shanshan realized that her posture was not very elegant, and her face instantly turned red. She quickly put down her legs, adjusted her skirt, and greeted calmly. Brother Jiang Long, you are back. Jiang Long changed his shoes, walked closer, and asked, What did you eat for lunch? Su Shanshan shook her head and said softly, Nothing. Can't cook. Jiang Long asked with a frown. Susan nodded. Jiang Long felt a little guilty. He didn't expect that she didn't even have lunch. Seeing that it was already dinner time, he quickly said, Wait, I'll make you something to eat. After that, Jiang Long went into the kitchen and hurriedly began to prepare a simple bowl of egg noodles. He washed his hands, chopped green onions, skillfully heated the pot, and while the water was boiling, he washed the vegetables, prepared the eggs and noodles. The busy sounds in the kitchen caught Susan's attention. She walked to the kitchen door curiously and saw Jiang Long busy attentively. She couldn't help but smile. He seemed to sense her gaze and turned his head to look at her. Susan smiled at him, and Jiang Long also smiled and continued to work. Su Shanshan looked at Jiang Long and sighed silently in her heart. I didn't expect that such an outstanding man would be abandoned by a woman. She couldn't help but imagine the scene of Jiang Long being trapped in love last night, and thought that Jiang Long must have been caught in the rain because of emotional frustration. But after careful observation, she found that there was no trace of women in the house, and Jiang Long was obviously a good man who kept himself clean. Brother Jiang Long, you are so awesome. She walked to the kitchen door and gave him a thumbs up in praise. Jiang Long smiled and said, It's just cooking a bowl of noodles. Is this amazing? Susan nodded seriously. To me, you are amazing. Jiang Long touched his nose somewhat embarrassedly, and suddenly recalled the scene when Qinya tasted his cooking. At that time, he spent a lot of effort to make sweet and sour pork ribs and braised prawns, and ran to the school to send them to her. As a result, she took a bite and stopped eating, saying that she didn't eat greasy food in order to maintain her figure. He was in a very low mood at the time, but he still reluctantly told himself. It was enough for her to taste a bite. At least she tasted his heart. Now that I think about it, I was really good at being a bootlicker. Just as Jiang Long was lost in his memories, Susan suddenly came to his side and waved her hand in front of his eyes. Brother Jiang Long, Brother Jiang Long? Jiang Long suddenly came back to his senses and was stunned when he saw Su Shanshan's face full of concern. Let's eat quickly. I'm so hungry. Susan pulled Jiang Long and showed an innocent smile. Jiang Long looked at her, and a warm feeling welled up in his heart. He suddenly felt that the life in front of him was not so bad. Chapter 7. The Choice After Enlightenment. Go wait on the sofa, Jiang Long said to Susan while he was busy preparing noodles in the kitchen. Susan nodded and sat down on the sofa. The kitchen was small, so Jiang Long usually ate in the living room, and today was no exception. After a while, Jiang Long brought a bowl of steaming noodles and placed it on the coffee table. You can eat it, he said calmly. Su Shanshan looked at the bowl of noodles in front of her and couldn't help asking, Brother Jiang Long, what about yours? Jiang Long replied casually, This bowl is made for you. I won't eat at home tonight. I'm going to visit my friends. After he said that, he went into the bedroom to change his clothes. Hearing that Jiang Long was going out, Su Shanshan nodded in understanding. He was dumped by a woman last night, and today he was looking for friends to relieve his boredom. It seems that he can also get over the breakup. She was also hungry, so she picked up a piece of noodles with chopsticks and put it into her mouth. The moment the noodles entered her mouth, Susan's eyes lit up. This is so delicious. She couldn't help but eat the noodles faster and savor them carefully. The noodle soup accidentally stuck to the corner of her mouth, so she stretched out her tongue and licked it gently. At this moment, Jiang Long, who had just come out of the bedroom, happened to see her licking the corner of her mouth, and his eyes moved slightly. Su Shanshan saw Jiang Long. She quickly swallowed the noodles in her mouth and said with a smile, Brother Jiang Long, the noodles you made are so delicious. I love them so much. Jiang Long felt warm in his heart and smiled. Eat more if you like it. There's more in the pot. He responded indifferently. After changing his clothes, Jiang Long was ready to go out. Su Shanshan suddenly ran to his side, grabbed the corner of Jiang Long's clothes with her little hand, and looked at him eagerly. What's wrong? Jiang Long asked in confusion. Susan bit her lower lip, hesitated for a moment, and finally asked, Brother Jiang Long, when will you be back in the evening? Jiang Long thought for a moment and replied, Not sure. He and his friends never had a fixed time for drinking. Oh! Su Shanshan let go of her hand and whispered. When Jiang Long was about to leave, he turned around and saw Su Shanshan still standing there, looking at him with anxiety in her eyes. What's wrong with you? Jiang Long couldn't help but ask. Brother Jiang Long, can you come back earlier? Su Shanshan's voice was filled with a hint of request. Jiang Long hesitated for a moment, then nodded and said, I'll try to come back as soon as possible. Remember, don't open the door if someone knocks. I have the key. Susan finally breathed a sigh of relief and warned, You must keep your word. In the barbecue restaurant, David filled Jiang Long and Su Fei's glasses with wine and said with a smile, Come on, Lao Su. Let's toast to Brother Long. Su Fei also raised his cup and said with a smile, One for me. Su Fei was also shocked when he heard David say that Jiang Long gave up Qinya. After all, Jiang Long had been around Qinya for so many years and had given everything for her. It was hard for Su Fei to believe that he was giving up now, and he admired Jiang Long's perseverance. After the three of them clinked their glasses, David began to doubt whether Jiang Long had really given up on Qinya. Brother Long, have you really made up your mind? You're not just saying it casually, are you? Jiang Long gently shook the cup, looking at the wine inside, which was gleaming with golden light, and recalled the scene at the entrance of the KTV last night. The harsh words had broken his heart, but at this moment, when he mentioned Chinyo's name, his heart was surprisingly calm. He smiled and said as if he had suddenly realized something. I've really let it go. I used to think she was interested in me, so she pursued me for so long. But now I understand. How could someone who really likes you make you wait so long? She doesn't like me at all. Jiang Long sighed. The pursuit in the past now seemed like a joke. I really won't lick it again. Jiang Long picked up the cup and drank it all, letting go of the obsession in his heart. David and Su Fei looked at each other, raised their glasses, and said loudly, "Drink. Let's not talk about that anymore." The topic soon turned to Su Fei's blind date, and the three of them laughed heartily. However, Jiang Long, his mind kept popping up the image of Susan after taking a bath. Why did he think of this? He shook his head violently, trying to get rid of that scene from his mind. Chapter 8. Unexpected Cohabitation. Susan's Request. Jiang Long picked up his phone and checked the time. 8:46. David said proudly, "I haven't read novels in vain over the years. There are all kinds of women in novels. Books of golden houses and beautiful women." Jiang Long couldn't help but nod in agreement. Today's novels have a variety of themes, and the image of women is also ever-changing. As a part-time novelist, he has a deep understanding of this. However, he has never been good at love themes, and there are very few female characters in his novels. Su Fei frowned and questioned, "Can the women seen in novels be the same as in real life?" David looked disdainful. "How are they different?" "They are more or less the same. Would you like me to recommend some novels to you so you can gain some experience?" David suggested with a wicked smile. "Forget about the novel." Su Fei smiled and patted David's shoulder, then whispered, "But if you have anything good, don't forget to share it with me." David came over mysteriously and whispered, "Hey, don't worry. I'll bring the USB drive over on Monday and make a copy for you too. It's guaranteed to be exciting." Su Fei smiled and replied, "Good brother, it is true that we can share the happiness together." The three of them drank for a while, and Jiang Long looked at the time. It was already 9:30. He thought of Susan's expectant eyes when she was about to leave, and he began to feel uneasy. Would the little girl be scared when she was alone at home? "I have to retreat first," Jiang Long suddenly said. David and Su Fei looked at Jiang Long at the same time. "Why are you leaving so suddenly?" Jiang Long couldn't tell Su Shanshan directly, so he had to make an excuse. "I can't drink anymore." David and Su Fei exchanged glances and tacitly believed that Jiang Long was upset about Qinya and wanted to deal with it alone. Jiang Long took a taxi and returned to the rental house quickly. When he opened the door, he saw Susan curled up on the sofa watching TV. When she saw him coming back, she immediately turned off the TV and ran over. She had a smile on her little face, as if she was waiting for him to come back. "Brother Jiang Long, you're back." When Su Shanshan approached him, she smelled a faint smell of alcohol. She guessed. Jiang Long was dumped by a woman, so he drank to relieve his sorrow? Jiang Long nodded, changed his shoes, walked into the living room, sat on a chair, and looked at Susan. He asked straight to the point, "Susan, how long do you plan to stay with me?" Susan's face tensed up immediately, her eyes full of grievance. "Brother Jiang Long, are you trying to drive me away?" Jiang Long's heart softened when he saw her pitiful appearance. Maybe Susan was really a rebellious girl who ran away from home. If she asked others to take her in, the consequences would be disastrous. Thinking of this, Jiang Long sighed and decided to take her in temporarily. "That's not what I meant. You can stay here," Jiang Long said much more gently. Hearing this, Susan's tense face finally relaxed, and she smiled and said, "Can you stay as long as you want?" Jiang Long nodded helplessly, "Yeah." Susan immediately smiled happily and made a heart shape to Jiang Long. "Brother Jiang Long, you are so nice." Jiang Long chuckled, thinking that the girl was a bit familiar and had no scruples in getting along with him. His eyes inadvertently fell on Susan's legs. Because of her sitting posture, her skirt went up a little, revealing two slender, white legs that were so smooth that it was hard to ignore them. "Brother Jiang Long, why are you staring at my legs?" Su Shanshan noticed his gaze and squeezed her legs shyly. Jiang Long suddenly felt embarrassed, touched his nose, and explained, "I was wondering, you are wearing so little. Will your legs be frozen?" Susan immediately understood what Jiang Long meant. She also knew that her clothes were a bit revealing, especially since her skirt was too short and she was not wearing safety pants, which was indeed not very convenient. "Brother Jiang Long, I don't have any other clothes to wear," Su Shanshan said aggrievedly. "Didn't I lend you my clothes?" "Your clothes are too big. I still prefer to wear my own." Susan pouted. Jiang Long recalled how she came out of the bathroom last night, wearing his baggy clothes, which indeed looked ill-fitting. Su Shanshan rolled her eyes, moved to Jiang Long's side, and asked with her big eyes flashing, "Brother Jiang Long, can you lend me some money?" Chapter 9, Shopping Incident. Susan's Little Trick. Jiang Long's eyes slowly fell on Su Shanshan. This little girl not only ate and lived with him, but now she wanted to borrow money. Although he was a little dissatisfied, he still asked, "How much do you want to borrow?" Susan's little head was spinning rapidly, and she had already started calculating. Toothbrush, toothpaste, cosmetics, underwear, shoes, all kinds of daily necessities came to mind one by one. Well, I also need to buy underwear and slippers. After thinking for a long time, she felt that it would cost at least 20,000 yuan. She held out two fingers in front of Jiang Long and said with a smile, "That's the number." Jiang Long looked at the two slender fingers and thought, 2,000 is not much. The girl will definitely buy some daily necessities after she stays here. So he nodded, got up, and took 2,000 yuan in cash from the bedroom and put it on the coffee table. Susan was stunned when she saw the thin stack of money. She was planning to borrow 20,000 yuan, but Jiang Long only gave her 2,000 yuan? What can she do with 2,000 yuan? Not even enough for a pair of underwear. Although she was depressed, she suppressed her emotions and thought, "Forget it. Jiang Long has been kind enough to take me in and lend me money, so 2,000 yuan is 2,000 yuan. It's better than nothing." She immediately put on a sweet smile. "Brother Jiang Long, thank you for lending me the money. Don't worry, I will definitely pay you back in the future, 10 times or 100 times." Jiang Long smiled, not caring about the 2,000 yuan, and said casually, "Don't worry about paying it back." Su Shanshan asked again, "Brother Jiang Long, I want to buy some daily necessities. Is there a supermarket nearby?" Jiang Long nodded. "There is a 24-hour supermarket. Do you want to go now?" "Okay." Susan immediately put the money in her pocket and prepared to leave. Jiang Long watched her stuff the stack of money into her skirt pocket, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. "Your skirt has pockets?" Susan explained with a smile. "Of course. Girls' clothes are designed differently." Seeing that she was so interested, Jiang Long said nothing more and prepared to go with her. After all, it was so late, and he was worried about letting her go alone. "Okay, I'll go with you." Susan's face was immediately filled with smiles, and she made a heart gesture towards Jiang Long. "Brother Jiang Long, you are so nice." Jiang Long smiled helplessly and thought to himself, "This little girl is quite good at pleasing others." Before going out, Su Shanshan suddenly thought of something and quickly said, "Brother Jiang Long, please lend me a hat and a mask." Soon, Su Shanshan, wearing a black baseball cap and a mask, followed Jiang Long to the supermarket. Along the way, Susan looked around, fully armed like a secret agent. Seeing this, Jiang Long couldn't help but laugh and said, "You are wrapped so tightly that no one can recognize you." Susan smiled sheepishly. "I just don't want others to see my stunning beauty." Jiang Long couldn't help but tease, "What a pity such a good beauty is only seen by me." Susan chuckled and said seriously, "It's not a pity. You are a good man who took me in out of kindness." "Good man? Just because I lend you some money?" Jiang Long was amused by her. "Of course, in my eyes, brother Jiang Long is a good man." Su Shanshan said firmly, "We've only known each other for 2 days, and you're jumping to conclusions so easily?" Susan replied as a matter of course. "Some people can be recognized at a glance, while others can never be seen through no matter how long you know them." Jiang Long was silent for a while, and suddenly felt that what she said made sense. Qinya was the person who could not be impressed no matter how long he had known her. But the little girl in front of him easily let down his guard. After arriving at the supermarket, Susan picked out daily necessities, such as toothbrushes and toothpaste. She glanced at the prices and decisively picked the most expensive toothbrush at 59.9 yuan. "You're really good at picking." Jiang Long couldn't help but take a look at the things in the shopping cart and secretly sighed in his heart. All of them are the most expensive. While walking around, Jiang Long saw a row of women's slippers and thought of the funny look of the little girl wearing his large slippers. So he picked up a pair of pink slippers with a rabbit pattern and handed them to her. "How about this?" Susan chuckled. "Brother Jiang Long has good taste. These slippers are very cute." Jiang Long was about to put the slippers into the shopping cart when Susan stopped him. "They are too big. I can't wear them." "What size are you?" "Number 36. Susan replied with a smile. Jiang Long raised his eyebrows in surprise. Such a tall man, but his feet are so small. Chapter 10. Supermarket Encounters and Awkward Moments. Jiang Long's eyes moved down, passing over Su Shanshan's fair thighs, and finally stopped at the black leather shoes on her feet. The little girl's feet were really small, indeed a pair of small feet. He picked a pair of size 36 pink bunny slippers and put them in the shopping cart. and then they continued to shop in the supermarket. Zhang Long noticed that Susan was looking around, as if looking for something, so he asked, "Susan, what are you looking for?" Susan bit her lip, twirled her fingers sheepishly, her eyes flickering, and she seemed a little embarrassed to speak. Zhang Long saw her expression and guessed that she might be looking for some private items. He cleared his throat and took the initiative to ask, "Tell me, I will help you find it." Susan finally plucked up the courage and whispered, "Brother Zhang Long, I want to buy some underwear." Zhang Long was slightly stunned. He didn't expect it to be this. Seeing Susan's embarrassed face, he casually explained, "We don't have these things here. This supermarket doesn't sell them." "Oh." Susan lowered her head, a little disappointed. Zhang Long looked at the time and frowned. "There is a lingerie store nearby, but it's closed now. Let's go there tomorrow." Susan nodded, although she was a little reluctant, but she could only wait until tomorrow to buy. She wanted to continue shopping, but when she saw Zhang Long yawning, she felt embarrassed to waste time thinking that he had been busy all day. When it was time to pay the bill, Susan was about to take out the 2,000 yuan from her pocket, but Zhang Long handed over his phone first and scanned the code to pay. Susan looked at him with confusion. "Brother Zhang Long, you lent me money. Why are you paying for me?" Zhang Long glanced at her and said calmly, "Return it to me later." "Yeah." Susan nodded obediently, but seeing Zhang Long still carrying her shopping bag, she couldn't help but say, "Brother Zhang Long, let me carry it." As soon as she said that, she reached out and touched the back of Zhang Long's hand. At that moment, the girl's fingers were soft and smooth, and the warm touch made Zhang Long slightly startled. "No, I'll carry it." Zhang Long held the shopping bag tightly and slightly avoided her hand. Susan had no choice but to give up, her face slightly flushed. She suddenly remembered the time when she hid in Zhang Long's arms, and she couldn't help but secretly glance at him, her heartbeat speeding up. Zhang Long be dumped by a woman? It must be that the woman didn't know how to cherish him. After returning to the rental house, Zhang Long went straight into the bathroom to take a shower. As soon as he walked out of the bathroom, Zhang Long saw Su Shanshan standing in front of the sofa, holding his black underwear in her hand. Their eyes met, and Su Shanshan's hand shook, and the underwear fell to the ground. Zhang Long's heart was shocked, and his pupils shrank sharply. "Fuck! Why is the little girl taking my underwear?" Susan blushed, quickly picked up the underwear, threw it into the pile of clothes on the sofa, and hurriedly explained, "Brother Zhang Long, don't get me wrong, I just want to help you collect the clothes." She originally went to the balcony to get clothes, thinking that Zhang Long had been helping her, so she wanted to help him do something, but she didn't expect to receive his underwear. This scene was extremely embarrassing, and she was so ashamed that she didn't know what to do. Zhang Long looked at the folded clothes on the sofa, then looked at Susan's shy face, and thought that she should not be that kind of weird girl, so he believed her words. "Oh, it's okay, thank you," Zhang Long said as he picked up his clothes and returned to the bedroom. After the door was closed, Susan breathed a sigh of relief. The scene just now was so embarrassing. Zhang Long put away his clothes. He lay on the bed, took out his mobile phone, opened the backstage of Tomato Novel, and saw that his fans had increased by dozens. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but rise. He started writing novels in his senior year. At first, no one was interested in his novels, and he made very little money. But as time went on, he mastered some writing routines, and his income began to grow steadily. Although the income from writing novels is not much now, it is still a good side job. Just as Zhang Long was about to fall asleep, there was a sudden knock on the door. Boom, boom, boom. Chapter 11. Silent Embarrassment and Secret Heartbeat. Why would the girl come to his room so late at night? Chinya was lying on the bed in the graduate dormitory. Her heart was churning. She opened the chat box with Zhang Long many times, typed a few words, and deleted them in dissatisfaction. She was so angry that she threw her phone on the bed, her face tense. Zhang Long didn't contact her for the whole day, nor did he explain. Since they met, Zhang Long had never treated her like this. "Okay, Zhang Long, since you don't contact me, then don't contact me in the future." She opened the note interface angrily, her finger hovering on the delete key, but finally hesitated. She bit her lip and gave you one last chance. "If you don't explain tomorrow, I will really ignore you." "Brother Zhang Long, can I come in?" Su Shanshan's sweet voice came from outside the door, interrupting Zhang Long's thoughts. Zhang Long frowned, wondering why this little girl wanted to see him so late at night. She had always been quite casual. Could she really do something outrageous? He asked with some caution, "Susan, what are you doing?" Susan replied quietly, You borrowed my clothes yesterday. Can you lend them to me for another night? It turned out that she wanted to borrow some clothes. Long heaved a sigh of relief, and his vigilant eyes relaxed. The little girl was still quite innocent. Come in, Long responded. The door was pushed open, and Susan's beautiful eyes instantly fell on Long's shirtless body. Her little face flushed, and her eyes involuntarily stopped on his strong abdominal muscles. Oh my God, Long has a great figure, and he has abdominal muscles, she secretly exclaimed in her heart. Long looked down at himself and realized that he was not wearing a shirt. He touched his nose awkwardly. Fortunately, he was still wearing pajamas, so he was not too exposed. It seems that if there are girls at home, you really need to be careful. He simply stopped covering up and took out yesterday's black t-shirt and sweatpants from the closet and handed them to Susan. For you. Susan blushed, took the clothes quickly, and ran out without even saying thank you. While taking a shower, the image of Long's broad shoulders and narrow waist kept appearing in her mind, and she couldn't get rid of it. The next morning, Long prepared breakfast and walked to the sofa to wake Susan up. The little girl was sleeping soundly, with a trace of saliva hanging from the corner of her mouth and a few strands of hair sticking to her face, looking like she had a sweet dream. Susan, get up and eat, Long called her. She twisted her body, but still showed no sign of waking up. Long shook his head helplessly, picked up a pen, and poked her nose gently. Susan finally woke up slowly, and when she saw Long's face in front of her, she was so scared that she shrank back into the quilt. Get up quickly and have breakfast, Long said calmly, turned and walked into the kitchen. Susan heaved a sigh of relief, a little annoyed at her reaction just now. While eating breakfast, she turned on the rainbow fart mode and kept praising Long. Brother Long, the porridge you cook is delicious. Brother Long, your egg pancakes are so delicious and your cooking skills are amazing. Brother Long, you can also make steamed buns. You are really versatile. Long's mouth twitched and he explained, the steamed buns were bought from the supermarket. Su Shanshan stuck out her tongue mischievously and said with a giggle, that was also heated up by you, Long. Otherwise, I would have to eat cold steamed buns. Long lowered his head helplessly to eat and ignored her. After dinner, Susan took the responsibility of washing the dishes. She knew very well that she lived with Long, ate his food, used his things, and spent his money, so she had to be diligent, otherwise she would be kicked out. Then, the two went out together to buy underwear and clothes for Susan. During the day, Susan was fully armed, with a hat and mask that looked particularly eye-catching, especially her long legs that were so white that they glowed, which attracted the attention of passersby. When they arrived at the lingerie store, a middle-aged woman greeted them warmly. Long stood in the store, feeling awkward, not knowing where to look. This was his first time in a lingerie store, and the dazzling array of fabrics overwhelmed him. He tried to restrain his gaze, but secretly thought that these fabrics were really exquisite. The color, style, material, and even the decoration were very exquisite. Well, they were really good. However, his thoughts were interrupted by Susan's voice. Chapter 12. Sweet Misunderstanding and Intimate Care. Little girl, do you want to buy some lingerie? In the lingerie store, a middle-aged woman greeted Susan enthusiastically. Susan looked up, her beautiful eyes swept across the dazzling array of underwear in the store, and she couldn't help but glance at Long beside her. She felt a little awkward, as she had never expected that Long would accompany her to buy these underwear. But rather than being embarrassed, she wanted Long to be by her side, as if only in this way could she feel at ease. Sister, let me take a look first, Susan replied softly. When the middle-aged woman heard Susan call her sister, she immediately smiled and said in a more cordial tone, Little girl, take your time to choose. If you like any of them, I'll help you pick them out. Long stood aside, watching Su Shanshan's performance, and secretly sighed, this little girl is so sweet. She also praised herself in the same way when she was eating in the morning. People with sweet words are always easy to be liked by others. Suddenly, the middle-aged woman turned her gaze to Long and asked with a smile, Handsome man, do you want to help your girlfriend choose a set? As soon as the words fell, Long and Su Shanshan were both stunned. Long coughed lightly and quickly explained, She is not my girlfriend. Susan also quickly whispered, Sister, he is not my boyfriend. Her cheeks were slightly hot under the mask. Seeing this, the middle-aged woman joked, If you are not boyfriend and girlfriend, why are you choosing underwear together? Susan didn't know how to explain for a moment. She twirled her fingers and lowered her head in embarrassment. Zhang Long didn't know how to respond, so he just said, "I'm her brother." Su Shanshan's eyes rolled, and she immediately took over the conversation. "Yes, yes, he is my brother, and I am his sister." As she spoke, she suddenly put her arm around Zhang Long's and moved very close to him. Zhang Long clearly felt the soft touch on his arm, and his heart trembled, but he did not dare to break free for fear of making the situation more embarrassing. The middle-aged woman smiled. Although she didn't quite believe it, she didn't ask any more questions. After all, the customer's mood was the most important thing, and she didn't want to lose business because of her joke. Susan finally let go of Jiang Long's arm, with a bit of apology on her face, and secretly glanced at Jiang Long. Her eyes seemed to say, "I just want to deal with that, sister, don't mind it." Jiang Long nodded slightly to her, indicating that he didn't care. Next, Susan chose a set of white lace underwear, a set of black underwear, and a set of pink bunny pattern underwear. When she chose the pink bunny pattern, she looked at Jiang Long and secretly thought that this set would match the slippers Jiang Long had chosen for her. Jiang Long naturally noticed this as well. The bra, underwear, and slippers were all pink with rabbit patterns. It was an unexpected three-piece set. When Susan was about to check out, Jiang Long suddenly called her. His eyes were fixed on the stockings hanging in the corner of the store. The various styles dazzled him. Black stockings, white stockings, short stockings, fishnet stockings, lace stockings. He couldn't name them all, but some of them were indeed eye-catching. He pointed at the black stockings and said to Susan, "Aren't you wearing this? It's a good opportunity to buy them together." Susan's face flushed instantly. She quickly chose a pair of black and white stockings and walked towards the cashier. "The total is 2,168 yuan. The middle-aged woman quoted the total price. Susan wanted to take out the 2,000 yuan that Jiang Long had lent her from her skirt pocket, but she found that it was not enough. When she was in a dilemma, she suddenly heard a notification sound that 2,168 yuan has been received through Alipay. She turned her head and saw that Jiang Long had already paid for her. She winked at Jiang Long, her eyebrows curved. "Thank you, brother." Jiang Long naturally picked up the shopping bag and said lightly, "You're welcome." The two then went to a nearby women's clothing store and bought a few pieces of clothing before returning to the rental house. Back in the house, Susan took off her hat and mask with a thin layer of sweat on her face. "Go wash your face," Jiang Long said casually, and took out a bottle of water from the refrigerator and drank it down with one gulp. At noon, Jiang Long cooked 2 dishes, braised pork and stir-fried vegetables. Susan ate and praised. "Brother Jiang Long, your braised pork is so delicious." Jiang Long felt a little flattered, thinking that the little girl was so sweet, and she praised him so much that he felt very happy. After dinner, Jiang Long told Susan that there were books for her to read in the living room, and he went into the bedroom to write. In the afternoon, he wrote 4,000 words in one go and uploaded them to the novel platform, feeling much more relaxed. After dinner, Jiang Long was still in the bedroom, typing away. Susan looked at the closed door and began to wonder. Could it be that Jiang Long was still upset about being dumped by a woman? Chapter 13. This is the first time I've liked someone for so long. It's so hard to completely forget him. On the second floor of the Qingdao University cafeteria, Qinya, wearing a light yellow dress, sat there like a beautiful landscape painting. However, she was absent-minded at the moment. Her chopsticks kept poking the food on the plate, and sitting opposite her best friend, Wang Xinya. "Yao Yao, why don't you eat properly?" Wang Xinya asked after swallowing her food. "It's okay," Qinya responded indifferently. Wang Xinya glanced at Qinya and guessed that she was in a bad mood. Suddenly she asked, "By the way, today is Saturday. Didn't Jiang Long come to see you?" Qinya heard the word Jiang Long. Her face instantly turned ugly. "Are you guys going to have a conflict?" Wang Xinya asked tentatively. "Don't mention him to me." Qinya's tone was cold, and it was obvious that she had something on her mind. Wang Xinya realized that something was wrong and couldn't help but persuade her. "What's going on? Tell me, and I'll help you analyze it." Qinya hesitated for a moment and finally told Wang Xinya what happened in the KTV that night. Since Jiang Long sent her the umbrella that night, he never contacted her again, which really puzzled her. Wang Xinya frowned in thought, and suddenly a bold guess came up. Could it be that Jiang Long heard what we said in the KTV box? "What?" Qinya was puzzled. "You really don't remember?" "At that time, I asked you if you liked Jiang Long, and you said, 'How is it possible? He was always around me, and I couldn't do anything.'" Qinya's face darkened a little more, and she tried to recall the scene of that night. Indeed, she was drunk and seemed to have said something similar. Did Jiang Long really hear these words? After understanding the reason, Chinya instantly felt much more relaxed, and her face returned to calm. She said disdainfully, "If you heard it, then you heard it. What's the big deal?" She had long been accustomed to Jiang Long being around her. She had rejected him so many times, but Jiang Long still pursued her like a dog. This time would be no exception. She was confident that Jiang Long would come back to her sooner or later. "Aren't you afraid that Jiang Long will really give up on you this time?" Wang Xinyao was a little worried. "He won't. He has liked me for so long. How could he let go easily?" Chinya replied with a sneer. Meanwhile, on Monday night, Jiang Long returned to his rental apartment after work, carrying a bag of vegetables and snacks. As soon as he opened the door, the smoke and strong smell of burning made him nervous. "Is the house on fire?" He quickly dropped his shopping bag and rushed into the house. Walking through the living room, Jiang Long saw Susan fighting in front of the stove in the kitchen. She had two ponytails, a white t-shirt and denim shorts, and a few streaks of black dust on her face, which clearly showed that the battle was fierce. "Brother Jiang Long, the food will be ready soon." Su Shanshan turned around and smiled sweetly, her twin ponytails swaying gently with her movements. Jiang Long smiled helplessly and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, it wasn't a fire, it was just Susan cooking. He quickly opened the window for ventilation, then walked into the kitchen and saw the black mass in the pot. His eyebrows jumped. "Is this dish really edible?" "Brother Jiang Long, the eggs I cooked just now were fine. Why did they suddenly turn black?" Susan looked at the black balls in the pot in frustration. Jiang Long held his forehead and couldn't help laughing. "Susan, let's not eat this for the sake of our health." Susan pouted, feeling aggrieved and about to cry. "But this is the first time I cook." Seeing the little girl's face full of expectation and grievance, Jiang Long couldn't bear to dampen her enthusiasm. He picked up the chopsticks reluctantly. "Okay, I'll try it." Susan's eyes lit up and she looked at him expectantly. Jiang Long picked up a piece of black egg with difficulty and swallowed it directly without even chewing it. He quickly took a big gulp of water and barely suppressed the foreign object in his throat. "How is it?" Susan asked expectantly. Jiang Long cleared his throat and tried to force a smile. "It's not bad for the first time. It will get better and better in the future." Although it was a white lie, Jiang Long knew that the little girl would get better and better. Chapter 14 in Jiang Long's eyes. She is the same as everyone else, right? In Jiang Long's kitchen, the air was filled with the aroma of freshly cooked food. But this aroma did not cover up another suffocating atmosphere. Susan stood in front of the stove, with smoke coming out of the pot in front of her. The black eggs in the pot gave off a disgusting smell. "Brother Jiang Long, let me try it too." She picked up a piece of the black thing without hesitation and put her mouth close to it, her heart full of anticipation. However, when she took a bite, her face twisted instantly, and she exclaimed, "What the hell is this?" Jiang Long quickly reached out and pressed her wrist. "Don't eat it." His voice was anxious but with a hint of nervousness, and he thought to himself, "This little girl is so ignorant. Something bad will happen if she eats this." "Why?" Susan asked in confusion, with a puzzled look in her eyes. At this moment, her eyes accidentally fell on Jiang Long's hand holding her wrist. The big hand grasped her delicate wrist, which made her heart beat faster. "You must not eat anything in this pot." Jiang Long slowed down his voice slightly, but he felt a little embarrassed because he was too close. Susan was aware of the intimacy between the two, and she gently reminded, "Brother Jiang Long, you have been holding my wrist." Jiang Long suddenly came to his senses, awkwardly let go of his hand, his cheeks slightly flushed. "Sorry." He scratched his head, trying to hide his embarrassment. Susan's face also turned red, and she silently sighed in her heart. Jiang Long is really a good person. Seeing that Jiang Long would not let her eat, she took the initiative to try a mouthful, but immediately spat it out and quickly grabbed the water bottle to drink water to dilute the unbearable taste. At this time, Jiang Long noticed that the water she drank was exactly what he had just drunk, and his heart tightened, and he was suddenly at a loss. "This bottle of water is the one I just drank," he reminded. Susan blushed instantly, put down the water bottle in a hurry, and whispered, "I was in a hurry just now, so I accidentally drank your water." Jiang Long sighed inwardly. It seemed that today's kitchen battle was indeed a bit unbearable. He decided not to bother her anymore and threw the black eggs into the trash can. At the same time, Susan looked at the discarded masterpiece with a frustrated look on her face, feeling a little annoyed. "Brother Jiang Long, thank you. You were so nice. Susan smiled sweetly, her eyes full of gratitude. It's okay, you go out, I'll cook. Jiang Long drove her to the living room and started to clean the kitchen. Although he felt a little tired, he felt warm in his heart when he saw her smile. In the living room, Susan looked around inadvertently, and her eyes showed her favor for Jiang Long. She thought, Jiang Long is not only handsome, but also gentle, and he treats her so well. Does he think of her the same way in his heart? While Jiang Long was busy, Susan decided to do something to repay Jiang Long's kindness. She ran to the kitchen door and said seriously, Brother Jiang Long, I want to cook for you. Jiang Long was stunned. Why do you want to cook for me? He was a little surprised. After all, Su Shanshan was just a little girl. You cook for me every day. You want me to do it once. Her serious tone warmed Jiang Long's heart. But then he became worried. I appreciate your kindness, but cooking is not that simple. He didn't want to discourage her enthusiasm, but he also knew that she lacked experience. But I really want to cook for you. Susan looked directly into Jiang Long's eyes and said firmly, You. Jiang Long's heart softened. It was the first time someone was willing to pay such a price for him. He decided to give the little girl a chance. Maybe her efforts would have unexpected results. Okay, but you have to listen to me. He finally compromised. There was a gleam in Susan's eyes and a smile on her lips. Thank you, Brother Jiang Long. She happily ran to prepare the ingredients. At this moment, Jiang Long couldn't help but think of Chinya. She had never shown him such care and consideration. Perhaps Susan's presence would bring him new hope. Chapter 15. The Touch of Two Heartbeats. Unexpected warm protection. Jiang Long looked at Susan busy in the kitchen, feeling a little uneasy. This girl couldn't even boil an egg. If he really let her mess around in the kitchen, she might even set the house on fire. After thinking about it, Jiang Long said helplessly, If you really want to learn how to cook, I can teach you. Susan's eyes lit up all of a sudden, and she was as excited as a child. Really? Brother Jiang Long. Jiang Long nodded, but he was worried. He originally thought that Su Shanshan was just staying temporarily and would leave sooner or later. But now it seems that she plans to stay for a long time. Not only did she buy daily necessities, but she also wanted to learn how to cook. How could she have the slightest intention of leaving? Jiang Long looked at her and felt a little complicated. Since he had taken her in, he should take better care of her, since she had nowhere else to go anyway. However, we just finished dinner today, so I'd better wait until tomorrow night when I get home from work to teach you, Jiang Long said, fearing that she would get into an accident if she acted alone. Susan was a little disappointed. She still nodded obediently. Jiang Long looked at her obedient appearance and suddenly remembered that she didn't even have a mobile phone. He thought to himself, Let's go out for a while. Where are you going? Susan asked curiously. I'll buy you a cell phone. When they walked into the mobile phone store, Jiang Long noticed that the store owner, a middle-aged man, had his eyes glued to Su Shanshan, especially her thighs. His greedy and undisguised gaze made Jiang Long very uncomfortable. He immediately pulled Su Shanshan and turned around and walked out. Brother Jiang Long, what's wrong? Didn't you say you wanted to buy a cell phone? Su Shanshan looked confused. Let's go to another store. Jiang Long's face was calm, but a desire to protect him surged in his heart. They came to another mobile phone store. This time it was owned by a fashionable woman in her 30s, who enthusiastically recommended them a new domestic mobile phone with comprehensive functions and fashionable appearance. Jiang Long looked at the phone and thought it was suitable for Susan, so he asked her, Do you like this one? Susan took the phone and looked at it, then casually replied, Yeah, it's okay. Then, she suddenly thought of something and asked, Brother Jiang Long, can you lend me your phone? Jiang Long handed her the phone. Su Shanshan took a look at his old phone and turned to ask the boss, Do you still have this phone? The boss was stunned for a moment, then smiled and said, Yes, but it's from last year. Then I want this one. Susan said firmly. Jiang Long was a little surprised. That new phone is better. Are you sure you want to use the same old one as me? Susan nodded heavily. I want to be the same as you. Her tone was full of determination. The boss smiled, obviously thinking that the girl wanted a couple phone, but Jiang Long felt a little warm in his heart. Susan could have chosen a better one, but she saved money for him, and he was touched by her kindness. After buying the phone, the two walked side by side in the night. Jiang Long couldn't help but tell her, If you have anything to do at home during the day, feel free to contact me, okay? Susan nodded, and suddenly she felt something strange in her heart. Was he worried about her? She glanced at Jiang Long secretly. Her heartbeat quickened, but she didn't pay attention to her feet, and she stumbled and almost fell. Ah! At the moment she exclaimed, Jiang Long was quick to grab her waist and hold her firmly in his arms. Susan's face turned red instantly. Her small hands tightly grasped Jiang Long's clothes, her head pressed against his warm chest. Her heart beat even more violently. Under the dim street lights, the two stood very close, as if hugging each other. Jiang Long realized this ambiguous posture and quickly let go of his hand, his face slightly hot. Are you okay? Susan retreated from his arms in a panic, her voice as thin as a mosquito. It's okay. That's good. Be careful when you walk. Jiang Long tried to hide his embarrassment, but he felt a little confused. The two continued to walk forward. The atmosphere was a little subtle, but Susan's heart was still beating because of the touch just now. She suddenly felt that maybe staying with Jiang Long was not that bad. Chapter 16, What is her habit? She keeps sniffing him. The next day, company, Jiang Long ran into his colleague David in the restroom. David approached Jiang Long with a smirk on his face and teased, Brother Long, I didn't lie to you. Was it exciting last night? Jiang Long didn't realize what he was saying for a moment and asked casually, What? Didn't you watch the video I copied for you and Lao Su yesterday? David added with a wicked smile. Jiang Long then remembered that it was a film that David had secretly copied for them, but he had been so busy last night that he had forgotten about it. I haven't watched it yet, Jiang Long replied calmly. David chuckled and patted Jiang Long on the shoulder. Go back and enjoy it tonight, but don't get too obsessed. Jiang Long shook his head helplessly. Daong, I advise you to take it easy. Don't die of exhaustion at such a young age. How could that be? I know my limits, David said nonchalantly, and Jiang Long couldn't help laughing. They had been roommates in college, so he knew David's behavior too well. After telling the joke, Jiang Long left the toilet and walked towards the tea room. Last night, he wasted a lot of time teaching Susan how to cook and buying a mobile phone, so it was almost midnight when he finished his work. He was still a little sleepy this morning. He made himself a cup of coffee to wake himself up and prepare to go back to his workstation to continue writing. Just as he came out of the tea room, a figure bumped into him unexpectedly. The coffee in Jiang Long's hand instantly spilled on his chest, and his white t-shirt was immediately dyed brown. The coffee also dripped onto his black casual pants. Sorry, are you okay? A soft apology came. Jiang Long looked up and saw a hot woman standing in front of him. She was wearing a V-neck shirt and a tight skirt, black stockings on her legs, delicate features, and a somewhat apologetic look. This woman looked to be in her mid-20s. Jiang Long couldn't help but wonder if she was the woman of Lin Yuxuan, the company's rich second-generation boss. Jiang Long was used to the women coming and going around Lin Yuxuan, and thinking that the boss was usually nice to them, he waved his hand. It's okay. The woman looked at Jiang Long's disheveled appearance, frowned, and then said, I soiled your clothes. I'll give you another set. Jiang Long shook his head. No, I have to go back to work. The woman paused for a moment, stared at Jiang Long's back for a while, and finally turned and left without saying anything more. At the end of the afternoon, the sound of high heels rang out in the office, and everyone's eyes turned to the door. Only Jiang Long was concentrating on his work and didn't pay much attention to the movement around him. Lin Tinga was carrying an exquisite shopping bag. She glanced around and walked towards Jiang Long's workstation. She tapped Jiang Long's desk lightly. Jiang Long. Hearing someone calling him, Jiang Long subconsciously turned around and saw the woman who bumped into him that morning. How do you know my name? Jiang Long was a little confused. Lin Tinga pointed to the shopping bag on the corner of the table and said, I'll compensate you for your clothes. Jiang Long was stunned. He didn't expect this woman to be so quick and even buy clothes. Really, you don't need it. Take it back. Lin Tinga smiled disapprovingly, said this is for you. If you don't want it, throw it away, then walked out of the office in high heels, leaving behind an elegant bag. When they got home, Susan's little eyes had been staring at Jiang Long since she entered the house. Jiang Long felt a little uncomfortable and asked, Why are you staring at me? Su Shanshan suddenly moved closer to Jiang Long and sniffed him with her little nose. Jiang Long subconsciously took a few steps back and asked warily, What are you doing? Susan continued to smell it, her face full of doubts. Brother Jiang Long, you didn't wear this when you went out this morning, did you? Well, no. Jiang Long nodded and admitted. In his heart, he was somewhat impressed by Susan's observation. She was still sleeping in the morning, but she could still remember what he was wearing. Susan smiled, but secretly pondered Jiang Long's experience today, especially the expensive clothes and the faint aroma of coffee. Where did he go today? Chapter 17, Campus Encounter. The heart-stirring moment of unexpected reunion. Su Shanshan took a few steps back, putting some distance between herself and Jiang Long, and looked him up and down with a confused look on her face. Brother Jiang Long, why did you suddenly change your clothes before going to work? And you smell like coffee. Did you really go to work? There was a hint of doubt in her tone, and she didn't even realize it. Jiang Long understood immediately after hearing this. Did she misunderstand him and think he was doing something improper? He smiled helplessly and quickly explained the whole thing in detail to prevent Su Shanshan from thinking too much. After listening to his explanation, Susan finally breathed a sigh of relief. She really thought Jiang Long did not go to work today, but wanted to do something bad. Okay, I'll go take a shower and then teach you how to cook, Jiang Long said with a smile. After taking a shower, Jiang Long walked into the kitchen, and Su Shanshan stood obediently beside him, her face full of anticipation. Today I'll teach you a simple dish. How about scrambled eggs with persimmons? Jiang Long asked. Okay, I'll learn whatever Brother Jiang Long teaches me. Su Shanshan's eyes sparkled, and she looked extremely serious. Under Jiang Long's command, a plate of delicious fried eggs with persimmons appeared on the table in a short while. Susan looked at this dish full of accomplishment and couldn't help laughing like a child. Bring the dishes out, Jiang Long reminded, planning to cook another dish. Susan was about to serve the dishes when she suddenly thought of something. She picked up the chopsticks and handed them to Jiang Long, blinking her big eyes. Brother Jiang Long, try my cooking today. Jiang Long raised his eyebrows and laughed in his heart. This was clearly made by them together. How did it become her craft? However, he still took the chopsticks, took a bite, and the taste instantly spread in his mouth. How is it? Susan asked expectantly. Very good, Jiang Long answered truthfully. You really didn't lie to me, did you? Su Shanshan was worried and afraid that Jiang Long would just give her a perfunctory answer, so she continued to ask. Jiang Long couldn't help but laugh. If you don't believe me, try it yourself. Susan picked up the chopsticks, took a bite, and put it in her mouth. Her eyes suddenly lit up. It's really delicious. She looked surprised and happy. She never expected that she could make such a delicious dish. Jiang Long looked at her happy expression and felt helpless. He had used those chopsticks just now. However, when he thought about the fact that she had drunk his water before, he didn't worry about it anymore. Well, I didn't lie to you, did I? Now go take the dishes out, and I'll make another one. Brother Jiang Long, I want to learn more. Su Shanshan's eyes were full of desire. She had just learned how to cook a dish, but she seemed unsatisfied. Take your time. I'll teach you tomorrow. Jiang Long shook his head. He thought that since she had just started learning, it would be better to take it step by step. After dinner, Jiang Long chatted with Su Shanshan for a few words and then returned to his bedroom to continue working. Su Shanshan stared at his closed door in confusion, wondering, why is Jiang Long in such a hurry to go back to his bedroom? Has he not yet come out of the shadow of his broken heart? After a while, Susan knocked on Jiang Long's door. Come in. Jiang Long's voice came. She pushed the door open and saw Jiang Long sitting in front of the computer, seemingly busy with something. Jiang Long raised his head. What's going on? Brother Jiang Long, Qingdao University is nearby, right? Can you accompany me for a walk? Jiang Long was stunned for a moment, and memories of Qingya flashed through his mind, but he still nodded. Okay, wait for me. Soon after, they arrived at the campus of Qingdao University. Susan, wearing a mask, walked slowly with Jiang Long on the campus at night. The road was bustling, and the campus was filled with a lively atmosphere of summer. As they walked, they unknowingly arrived at the square. Su Shanshan saw a group of people gathered in the distance and couldn't help but ask curiously, Brother Jiang Long, shall we go over and take a look? Jiang Long responded, and the two walked towards the crowd. Through the gaps in the crowd, Susan saw a huge heart shape made of candles in the center of the square, and in the middle of the heart stood a girl in a white dress, with a boy kneeling in front of her holding flowers. This is courtship. Promise him, promise him. The people around started to make a fuss. But the girl in the white dress didn't take the flowers, and the atmosphere became tense and awkward. Suddenly, she said, I'm sorry, and turned to leave. At this moment, the girl in the white dress's eyes met Jiang Long in the crowd, and in an instant, the air seemed to freeze. Chapter 18. Some unexplained enjoyment. The moment Jiang Long saw Qingya, he froze instantly. They had not contacted each other since that rainy night, but he did not expect to see her again on the Qingdao University campus today. And she turned out to be the heroine of the courtship scene just now. Qingya has always had many suitors, and Jiang Long never doubted this. But she always rejected all the suitors, as if she was always a high and mighty goddess who could never be touched. Jiang Long had long given up on her. Perhaps no man could really enter her heart. Qinya and Jiang Long looked at each other for 2 seconds, then quickly looked away and walked through the crowd. The boy who failed in his courtship threw the flowers in his hand to the ground in frustration, and the crowd gradually dispersed. Jiang Long and Su Shanshan walked side by side on the path on campus. Su Shanshan kept recalling the courtship scene in her mind and couldn't help asking, "Brother Jiang Long, what do you think of the confession just now?" Jiang Long said calmly, "She doesn't like him. It's that simple." Susan nodded, then asked curiously, "Brother Jiang Long, have you ever confessed your love to a girl?" Hearing this question, Jiang Long's expression froze for a moment, and after a pause, he responded indifferently, "Yeah." Susan was embarrassed for a moment and almost bit her tongue. She quickly changed the subject. "The lake here is so beautiful. It's nice to take a walk by the lake when you have nothing to do. Yes, I graduated from Qingdao University, and I passed by here every day when I was in school," Jiang Long said with a hint of nostalgia. Susan suddenly realized, "No wonder you live so close to Qingdao University. It turns out it's because you can't bear to leave your alma mater." Jiang Long just smiled and didn't explain the real reason why he chose to live close by. That was to be closer to Qinya. Susan suddenly remembered something and asked in a low voice, "Brother Jiang Long, do you think I look like a high school student?" Jiang Long looked at her in confusion. "Didn't you say you were 17? You should still be in high school." Su Shanshan twirled her fingers guiltily and suddenly stood in front of Jiang Long, bowed deeply, and said sincerely, "Brother Jiang Long, I'm sorry. I actually lied to you." Jiang Long frowned slightly, staring at her with his dark eyes, waiting for her next words. "I'm not actually 17. I'm already 19 and will be 20 soon." Susan mustered up her courage and said, "I had just met you at that time and I was a little scared, so I lied. I hope you won't be angry." Jiang Long understood immediately. When they met on that rainy night, she lied about her young age to protect herself, which was indeed understandable. Thinking of this, he felt that she was quite smart. Seeing Jiang Long remain silent, Su Shanshan panicked a little and quickly clasped her hands together, apologizing nonstop. "Brother Jiang Long, please don't be angry, okay? I really know I was wrong. You are the best. You will definitely forgive me, right?" As she spoke, she carefully pulled up Jiang Long's arm and shook it, saying coquettishly, "Brother Jiang Long, hit me to calm down. Don't be angry anymore." Seeing her nervous look, Jiang Long couldn't help but want to tease her, so he pretended to be serious and said, "Okay, you asked me to hit you, so I will hit you." Susan's face changed, and she said with gritted teeth, "Okay, then you fight." Jiang Long rubbed his chin in a pretentious manner. "Don't hit the head. It's not good to make it stupid." Susan asked nervously, "Where are you going to hit?" Jiang Long smiled without saying anything and finally tapped her forehead lightly. Susan was stunned for a moment. Then she reacted, touched her forehead, and smiled. "It doesn't hurt at all. I knew you wouldn't want to really hit me." Jiang Long couldn't help laughing and shook his head. The innocence and playfulness of this little girl always made him relax unconsciously. Chapter 19. The interweaving of heartbeats and calculations. How many hidden skills does Susan have? Susan finally felt relieved when she saw that Jiang Long was not really angry. She walked away and said, "Brother Jiang Long, I'm actually a junior at Imperial Capital University, but I dropped out for some reasons." Jiang Long couldn't help but look at Su Shanshan more when he heard this. He was surprised. Imperial Capital University is the top school in the country. Those who can enter are either geniuses at the academic level or have a strong background. Unexpectedly, this girl who has always been by his side is actually a student of Imperial Capital University. "Oh." Jiang Long just responded lightly without asking any further questions. The two continued to walk and talk, and Su Shanshan suddenly asked, "Brother Jiang Long, do you like your current job?" "It's not a matter of whether I like it or not. This is what I studied in college, and I found a job that suits my major after graduation," Jiang Long said calmly. He chose this major for better employment and to make more money. After all, ordinary people don't have many choices in life, and every step must be carefully planned. Susan nodded thoughtfully. Suddenly, a soothing sound of music came and attracted her attention. She looked in the direction of the sound and found that the music came from a building not far away. "That's Qingdao University's concert hall," Jiang Long explained. Susan looked towards the concert hall curiously, especially at the piano she saw through the glass window. Her eyes lit up and she stopped. "Why don't you leave?" Jiang Long asked puzzledly. Su Shanshan smiled and suddenly asked, Brother Jiang Long, do you like music? Jiang Long nodded. He had no particular pursuit for music, but no one would hate it either. Susan grabbed his wrist and pulled him into the concert hall. In the empty concert hall, Susan walked to the piano and sat down. She turned to look at Jiang Long with a smile in her eyes. To Alice, for you. As her fingers gently fell, the sound of the piano echoed in the air. The melody was sometimes soft and sometimes rapid, as if telling every detail of the story. Jiang Long stood aside, listening quietly, and gradually immersed in the music. When the song ended, Jiang Long opened his eyes and found that a lot of people had gathered in the lobby on the first floor. Warm applause filled the entire concert hall. Susan raised her mask a little embarrassedly and quickly took Jiang Long's hand and fled the scene. When they were far away, Susan let go of Jiang Long's hand with a slightly embarrassed smile on her face. Jiang Long looked down at the hand she had just held tightly and couldn't help but praise her. Susan, you play really well. Su Shanshan smiled proudly. Thank you, Brother Jiang Long. I will play other songs for you when I have the chance. Okay. Jiang Long nodded, and he was full of curiosity about her. This little girl not only played the violin, but also played the piano so well. How many surprises did she have? On the other side, in a cafe near Qingdao University, Qinya and Wang Xinyao were sitting together. Wang Xinyao smiled and said, Yao Yao, the whole school knows that you rejected Ma Qingyang. Qinya took a sip of coffee without caring and said calmly, let it spread. Ma Qingyang is a rich second generation. His family is in real estate, and he is super rich. Why didn't you consider it? Wang Xinya asked puzzled. Qinya sighed softly. Ma Qingyang had been pursuing her for 3 months and had given her many expensive gifts, all of which she accepted. However, today, he confessed his love in front of so many people, so she could only refuse. Although she felt a little sorry for losing this gold sponsor, her principles could not change. Money is a good thing, but I won't like anyone just for money. Qinya smiled coldly. Wang Xinya curled her lips. It's really not easy to find someone who is rich, you like, and he likes you. At this moment, Jiang Long's figure appeared in Qinya's mind. Perhaps Jiang Long already knew what happened today, so he appeared on the Qingdao University campus. A smug smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. As expected, Jiang Long could not really let her go. Chapter 20. Unexpected Discovery. Surprises and Embarrassments in Sweet Daily Life. In the morning, Jiang Long opened the closet and wanted to find a white t-shirt, but he unexpectedly saw some clothes in the corner that did not belong to him. He was stunned for a moment, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. When did the little girl leave her clothes here with me? Fortunately, Susan put normal clothes. If she put some underwear, the scene would be embarrassing. Thinking of this, Jiang Long couldn't help but get curious. Where did Susan put those underwear? He thought about it and realized there was no wardrobe in the living room, only a small cabinet. Could she have put those things there? Sure enough, Susan did stuff her underwear into the small cabinet in the living room. It was a cabinet with 5 small drawers. The other drawers were full, so she had to stuff her underwear into the only empty drawer. Although it was crowded, she had no choice but to put them in. She originally wanted to put them in Jiang Long's closet, but she was afraid that he would be embarrassed when he saw them, so she put them in the living room. Last night, Susan's piano performance impressed Jiang Long so much that he even dreamed of her playing the piano. Before leaving, he deliberately glanced at her sleeping on the sofa and then rode his electric donkey to the company. Susan got up. She had a simple breakfast, tidied the room, and then went to Jiang Long's bedroom, opened his computer, and tried to find the recipe she had saved before. Where did I put it? She rummaged through the desktop and finally saw a folder marked Important Learning Materials. Her eyes lit up, and she thought that Jiang Long might have put her recipe in this folder when he was tidying up the desktop. She opened the folder, but was immediately stunned. It was full of video files. Are these videos Jiang Long's learning materials? But my recipes are not videos. Out of curiosity, Susan clicked on a video, which showed a beautiful woman in a bikini sitting by the pool. As the video progressed, a muscular man also appeared in the picture. Her face turned redder and her heart beat faster. What kind of study material was this? After watching for a few more seconds, Susan finally reacted and hurriedly turned off the video, her cheeks burning. She ran to the living room and tried to calm down, and her mind flashed back to what her best friend had said. I heard that almost all boys have this kind of learning materials, which is normal. Jiang Long may have some needs occasionally. She comforted herself, thinking that this did not affect his image in her mind. Jiang Long got home from work. He was greeted by the aroma of food. Susan came out of the kitchen with a plate of scrambled eggs with persimmons and said with a smile, "Brother Jiang Long, take a look at what I made. How is it?" Jiang Long looked at the dish, which was delicious and fragrant, and nodded with satisfaction. "Not bad. You are a teachable kid. Then what will you teach me to do later?" Susan asked expectantly. Jiang Long thought for a moment and said, "Let's make stir-fried pork with green peppers. This is simple. Once you learn it, you can apply it to other situations." Soon, under Jiang Long's guidance, Su Shanshan successfully finished stir-frying pork with green pepper. After the two finished their meal, they chatted for a while, and Jiang Long returned to the bedroom to continue working. However, not long after, Su Shanshan actually sent him a voice call request. When Jiang Long saw the name, his eyebrows moved. She was still calling through a door? After the call was connected, Su Shanshan's sweet voice came. "Brother Jiang Long, shall we watch a movie together?" Jiang Long thought about it for a few seconds and agreed. "Okay." Jiang Long walked out of the bedroom and saw Su Shanshan sitting obediently on the sofa. The coffee table was full of snacks. She patted the seat next to her and said with a smile, "Brother Jiang Long, sit here." Jiang Long smiled helplessly and sat next to her. "What movie do you want to see?" she asked. "Whatever, take your pick. Then let's watch a suspense movie." Susan found a suspense film, and the two ate snacks while watching the movie. After eating a few chips, Susan suddenly picked up a piece and handed it to Jiang Long. "Open your mouth, Jiang Long brother." Jiang Long was stunned for a moment, but he still opened his mouth and ate it. Susan continued to feed him with a smile, potato chips, chicken nuggets, and spicy strips. Just as they were immersed in the movie, Susan suddenly felt thirsty. Too lazy to get up, she pushed Jiang Long and said coquettishly, "Brother Jiang Long, help me get a bottle of water." Jiang Long chuckled and went to the kitchen. When he came back and sat down, Susan suddenly threw herself into his arms, screaming, "Ah!" Chapter 21. Brother Jiang Long, please let me sleep with you tonight. Jiang Long's body froze instantly. Susan's soft body pressed against him in his arms, and the clear touch made his breathing stagnate. He could even smell the faint fragrance on her body, and his mind was a little confused, not understanding why she suddenly rushed over. "Ghost, there is a ghost!" Su Shanshan's trembling voice reached Jiang Long's ears. Jiang Long then noticed the horrifying scene on the TV screen, and his brows couldn't help but frown slightly. Damn, isn't this a suspense film? How did it suddenly become a horror film? Jiang Long felt Susan's shoulders tremble slightly, raised his hand, and patted her back gently, comforting her. "Don't be afraid. It's all fake." Susan's face was pressed against his chest, and her hands were tightly holding his waist, not daring to let go. The ghost figure that suddenly appeared in the movie just now scared her to death. Jiang Long struggled to reach the remote control and turned off the TV. He looked down at Susan, who still refused to let go of him, and reluctantly reminded her, "The TV is off. It's okay. Can you let go?" Hearing Jiang Long's voice, Susan realized that she was still hugging him tightly, and her face instantly turned red like a ripe apple. She came out of Jiang Long's arms awkwardly and explained in a low voice, "It was too scary just now. I didn't mean it." Jiang Long looked at her flushed face and knew that she rushed over because she was frightened. He shook his head and said, "It's okay." He was worried that Susan was still afraid, so he patiently explained, "There are no ghosts in the world. The ones in the movies are all fake to create a scary effect. Don't be afraid." Susan listened to Jiang Long's explanation and nodded seriously. Although she knew it was fake, she couldn't control the fear in her heart. She remembered that after watching a ghost movie for the first time when she was a child, she was so scared that she had nightmares for several months. Since then, she never dared to touch any horror movies again. "Brother Jiang Long, I'm much better now." Su Shanshan took a deep breath and said to Jiang Long, "Are you really okay?" Jiang Long asked again worriedly. Susan nodded and waved her fist to show that she was fine. Seeing her recover, Jiang Long felt relieved, and then he put away the snacks on the coffee table, said a few words, and went back to the bedroom to continue typing. Susan, who was sitting on the sofa, came back to her senses and recalled the scene just now. She actually threw herself into Jiang Long's arms and hugged him for a long time. Thinking of this, her face couldn't help but blush again. She looked up at Jiang Long's bedroom door, which was not closed. She felt warm in her heart, knowing that Jiang Long had left the door open because he was afraid that she would be scared. Thinking of this, Susan smiled sweetly. It was late at night, and Jiang Long was just about to fall asleep when he felt something moving on the bed. He subconsciously reached out and touched it, and his fingertips touched something soft and fluffy. Jiang Long woke up suddenly, his eyes widened, and he felt a chill in his heart. Was there a big rat on the bed? He sat up suddenly, and in the moonlight, he saw that it was Susan. Her furry little head was facing him, her eyes staring at him in the dark. Who wouldn't be startled to see a little head in the middle of the night? Fortunately, Jiang Long recognized her as Su Shanshan, and his heart returned to normal. Susan, why did you get into my bed? Jiang Long asked in a low voice. Although the shock in his heart had subsided, he still felt a little nervous that Susan suddenly climbed into his bed in the middle of the night. Su Shanshan moved closer to Jiang Long and whispered, Brother Jiang Long, please let me sleep with you tonight. I'm scared. As soon as she said this, Jiang Long's heart skipped a beat and his ears instantly turned red. The little girl's words were simply threatening. Did she know how much of a shock it would be to say such words to a grown man? Jiang Long swallowed awkwardly and stammered. Don't let your imagination run wild. Get down now. Susan blinked her innocent eyes, her face aggrieved. I'm really scared. Please don't chase me away. Jiang Long was stunned for 2 seconds before he realized what was going on. It turned out that she was frightened by the movie. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief and asked, Because of the movie just now? Susan nodded. Jiang Long scratched his head, looking helpless. Susan was really scared, so she asked to sleep together. Please, brother Jiang Long. Su Shanshan's pleading look made Jiang Long finally grit his teeth and reluctantly agreed. This was the first time in 23 years that Jiang Long slept in the same bed with a girl. In order to avoid unnecessary embarrassment, Jiang Long tried to squeeze to the side of the bed, fearing that the two would have any physical contact. However, just as he thought this, he felt a slight squeeze from behind, and Susan's small body was pressed tightly against him. Jiang Long's pupils suddenly contracted, and he warned in a stiff voice, Su Shanshan, don't get too close to me. But I'm really scared. Her voice was weak. Jiang Long was silent, feeling the warmth coming from behind him, and he finally stopped talking. Chapter 22, Don't Be Afraid, I'm Here. Jiang Long lay on his side, unable to fall asleep. He was used to sleeping alone, and suddenly there was another person in the bed, so he felt a little uncomfortable. Brother Jiang Long, are you asleep? Su Shanshan's gentle voice sounded in his ears. No, Jiang Long replied indifferently. Can you turn your face around? Susan pleaded. It was awkward enough for the two of them to sleep in the same bed. Wouldn't it be even more awkward if they were facing each other? Jiang Long hesitated for a moment, but still turned around obediently. At night, Jiang Long and Su Shanshan lay face to face, staring into each other's eyes. Su Shanshan's big eyes were particularly bright in the darkness, and she looked a little uneasy. Don't be afraid. I'm here. Jiang Long comforted softly. Susan's eyelashes trembled slightly, and she uttered a soft and suddenly felt extremely warm in her heart. Close your eyes. Jiang Long continued. Susan closed her eyes obediently, with a faint smile on her lips. Brother Jiang Long, thank you. The next morning, the alarm on his cell phone rang twice. Jiang Long reached out to turn it off in a daze, but found that his arm was pressed by something. He moved his hand and immediately felt a soft touch. Jiang Long suddenly woke up and looked down. Su Shanshan was holding his arms tightly in her arms. Jiang Long couldn't help but look at Su Shanshan's chest, and his face twitched. When did she hug his arm? Why didn't he feel anything? Susan was sleeping soundly, and Jiang Long didn't want to wake her up, so he took his arm out of her arms carefully with great effort, his heart beating faster. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and got up quickly to go out. Jiang Long arrived at the traffic light. He was waiting for the signal when he suddenly heard someone calling his name. He turned around and saw a woman wearing sunglasses sitting in a red Porsche, smiling at him. Jiang Long frowned. Does this woman know him? The other party took off her sunglasses, and Jiang Long finally recognized her. It was the woman who had bumped into him and paid for his clothes. She looked more dazzling than last time, driving a valuable Porsche, and was obviously a rich girl. Jiang Long nodded politely, turned back and stared at the red light countdown, looking very indifferent. Seeing this, Lin Tinga couldn't help but tighten her fingers on the steering wheel. This man was so indifferent to her greeting, and she suddenly felt dissatisfied. She wanted to say something, but Jiang Long had already left on his electric scooter. Lin Tinga felt annoyed, stepped on the accelerator hard, and drove away from the intersection with a burst of rapid horn sounds. During lunch, Jiang Long and his colleagues David and Su Fei got together to chat. Lao Su, how is things going between you and your blind date? David asked. We met once, had a meal, and chat on WeChat, Su Fei responded. Chinese Valentine's Day is coming soon. Have you prepared the gifts? David continued to tease. Su Fei nodded, and David soon brought up the topic of hotels fully booked on Chinese Valentine's Day. David had a smirk on his face, and Su Fei waved his hand helplessly to reject his proposal, saying that he would not mess around. David turned to Jiang Long and asked with a smile, Brother Long, how about we two single guys spend Chinese Valentine's Day together? Jiang Long gave him a look of disdain. Don't you find it disgusting that two grown men spend Chinese Valentine's Day together? David thought about it and reacted instantly. Shit, this style is definitely wrong. He smiled awkwardly and changed the subject. After returning home, Jiang Long looked at the two familiar dishes on the coffee table, fried eggs with persimmons and stir-fried pork with green peppers, and his eyebrows moved slightly. The day before yesterday, he had fried eggs with persimmons. Yesterday, he had stir-fried pork with green peppers. And today, he had these two dishes again. Jiang Long tried to keep smiling and put down his chopsticks after eating a few bites. Su Shanshan saw this and asked with concern, Brother Jiang Long, why did you eat so little today? Is it because my cooking is not delicious? No, you did a good job. It's just that I ate a lot at noon, and I'm not very hungry yet. Jiang Long explained quickly. Susan lowered her head, somewhat self-blaming. I want to learn other dishes, but I'm afraid I won't be able to do it well and cause you trouble. You've done very well. Don't worry. I will teach you more dishes later. Jiang Long comforted her. Su Shanshan raised her head and finally smiled when she heard this. Seeing that she was obviously not full, Jiang Long suggested going to the food street near Qingdao University. Susan's eyes lit up, but then she hesitated. I'd better not go. Jiang Long knew her concerns and said with a smile, We can buy some to eat, or find a deserted place where no one will see you. Chapter 23, Why does she always want to touch Jiang Long easily when facing him? Soon after, Susan and Jiang Long, dressed neatly, appeared downstairs in the community. Jiang Long pushed his black electric scooter over and tapped the back seat. Get in. Susan looked at the electric scooter with curiosity in her eyes, but she didn't ask any more questions and sat on the back seat as she was told. Jiang Long noticed her doubts and asked, Susan, have you never ridden an electric scooter before? Susan nodded obediently. I've never sat there before. Jiang Long smiled and put on his helmet. You should try everything. Today I will show you how to experience it. Susan giggled. Yeah, that's going to be fun. Jiang Long was about to start the car, but he noticed that Susan's hands were not holding anything. So he reminded her, Susan, you are not wearing a helmet. You must hold on tightly, otherwise it will be dangerous. Susan blinked. Her eyes fell on Jiang Long's waist. Then she decisively put her arms around his waist and said obediently, I'll hold on tight. Feeling the soft touch on his waist, Jiang Long's whole body tensed up. Although he was a little nervous, he said nothing more and started the e-scooter to drive forward. The breeze blew through their hair. Susan sat in the back seat, feeling happy. Her palms felt the solid muscles of Jiang Long's abdomen, and her smile became even brighter. It felt so good. Soon, they arrived at the food street. It was bustling with people, and there were many snack stalls on both sides of the street, exuding tempting aromas. Susan was shocked by the lively scene in front of her. She had never seen a place with such a lively atmosphere. Jiang Long looked at Su Shanshan with surprise and couldn't help asking, Isn't this your first time in a place like this? Susan nodded sheepishly. Yeah, I've never been here before. Jiang Long was slightly surprised and couldn't help but be curious about Susan's previous life. She had never ridden an electric scooter or been to a food court. So how did she get by? Don't just stand there. I'll buy you whatever you want to eat. Jiang Long smiled and broke her daze. I don't know what to eat. Please help me choose. Susan said obediently. Jiang Long took her to a fried tripe stall with familiarity. After ordering 2 servings, he continued to buy various snacks such as squid, grilled cold noodles, grilled oysters, etc., and his hands were full. Brother Jiang Long, can we finish all this? Su Shanshan was a little worried. Jiang Long smiled and said, I can finish it. They found a quiet corner of a nearby park and sat on a bench with delicious food in front of them. Susan took off her mask and stared at the food with shining eyes. Jiang Long handed her a box of fried tripe. Try this first, it's my favorite. Susan took a bite and her eyes lit up instantly. It's so delicious. Jiang Long smiled and said, I didn't lie to you, did I? The two of them ate delicious food and chatted, and finally ate all the snacks. Susan touched her round belly and lamented that she had eaten so much. Let's take a walk to digest the food before going back, she suggested. Suddenly, Su Shanshan came up to Jiang Long and covered her mouth with her hands and laughed. Jiang Long subconsciously stepped back. What are you laughing at? Susan stretched out her finger and gently wiped off the sesame seeds at the corners of his mouth. There's something on your mouth. I'll help you wipe it off. Jiang Long's cheeks flushed instantly, and he hurriedly explained. What are you doing? Susan was a little embarrassed, lowered her head, and said softly, Nothing, I just want to help you wipe it off. She didn't know why, but when facing Jiang Long, she always had an inexplicable sense of closeness, and even wanted to touch him easily. D24 Dong, don't go astray. Know when to stop. After Jiang Long drove Su Shanshan back to the rental house, he went straight back to the bedroom and started typing, while Su Shanshan sat on the sofa, picked up her phone, and habitually opened WeChat. After entering the account in the Add Friend column, a cute avatar wearing a lavender Lolita dress popped up. It was her good sister, Xianu Anyuan. Susan looked at the familiar profile picture and couldn't help but smile sweetly. She wanted to contact Xianu Anyuan, but now was not the right time, and she couldn't take the risk. After changing into pajamas, Susan looked up at the bedroom and saw Jiang Long was still busy. She was a little curious, so she tiptoed to the bedroom door. She leaned in and found Jiang Long typing attentively on the computer. Brother Jiang Long, what are you writing? Su Shanshan asked softly. Jiang Long was startled and quickly clicked save and closed the writing software, looking panicked. Not many people knew that he was writing novels part-time, especially those novels were sometimes bold. If Su Shanshan saw them, it would be a social demise. When did you come here? Jiang Long asked nervously. Just got here. Susan blinked and smiled. Did you see what I wrote? Jiang Long asked cautiously. Susan shook her head and glanced at the computer screen casually. I can't see it clearly. The words are so densely packed. Jiang Long breathed a sigh of relief, but Susan's expression gradually became strange. She thought of the learning materials she had found on Jiang Long's computer before and began to have some doubts. Brother Jiang Long, I advise you, you are still young, don't always immerse yourself in that kind of thing. Su Shanshan blushed and reminded seriously. Jiang Long was confused. What are you talking about? Susan bit her lip shyly and continued. I know what the important learning materials in your computer are. You didn't think that was enough and wrote more exciting content yourself, did you? Brother Jiang Long, for the sake of your health, you have to stop. Susan said this in one breath and ran out of the bedroom with a red face. Jiang Long was stunned, with a face full of question marks. Important learning materials? Exciting content? What's going on? After sitting in the chair and calming down for a while, he suddenly remembered the folder marked Important Learning Materials on his computer desktop and understood it instantly. He immediately clicked on the folder and randomly opened one of the videos, and immediately the disgusting images and sounds popped up. Jiang Long quickly turned off the video, his palms sweating. Oh no! Susan must have heard it. Jiang Long held his forehead helplessly. Susan, who was sitting on the sofa in the living room, heard the sound coming from the bedroom clearly, and she was even more angry. She had just advised him kindly, but within a minute, Jiang Long was watching this kind of thing. Humph! Jiang Long calmed down for a few minutes. He finally walked out of the bedroom and sat next to Susan. He scratched his head and explained, Susan, it's not what you think. Those study materials are not mine. I don't usually read this kind of stuff. Susan didn't believe it and pouted. If it's not yours, how come it's on your computer? My friend gave it to me, and I couldn't refuse, Jiang Long explained dryly. Susan pouted. Although she didn't completely believe it, she didn't want to pursue the topic any further. The atmosphere was silent for a while, and Jiang Long decided to change the subject. Actually, when you just came in, I was writing a novel. Novel? Su Shanshan's eyes lit up instantly. Brother Jiang Long, you can also write novels? That's amazing. Jiang Long scratched his head a little embarrassedly, just writing casually. Then let me see it, Susan asked excitedly. No. Jiang Long immediately shook his head. Why? Susan was puzzled. It's not well written. Jiang Long said lightly. I don't mind, Susan said expectantly. I mind, Jiang Long said firmly. Susan pouted, looking dissatisfied. You are so stingy. Show me what you can do. Jiang Long still insisted. I really can't show it to you. Stingy, Susan complained. No matter how Susan protested, Jiang Long remained indifferent and kept his secret tightly. Chapter 25. Don't cry. It won't look good if you cry anymore. Su Shanshan wanted to read Jiang Long's novel, but he decisively refused. She felt unwilling and asked, "Do you write novels because you like it?" Jiang Long was a little embarrassed. At first, he did write for his hobby, but later, the temptation of making money made him work harder. So he answered truthfully, "To make money." Susan nodded thoughtfully, with a hint of distress in her eyes. "Brother Jiang Long, are you short of money?" Jiang Long smiled and shook his head. "I'm not short of money. I just want to make more money." He had spent a lot of time and money pursuing Chinya, but now he knows more clearly that there are more important things in life, such as family. He no longer fights for empty feelings, but for a better future for his family. "Brother Jiang Long, how much money can you earn every month?" Su Shanshan continued to ask. "About 10,000. Jiang Long answered truthfully. Susan's heart tightened when she heard this number. She had always thought Jiang Long lived an easy life, but this income was indeed not much for the responsibilities he had to bear. Thinking of Jiang Long buying her a mobile phone, clothes, and taking her to the food court, her eyes suddenly became wet. Jiang Long saw tears in her eyes and panicked. "Su Shanshan, what's wrong with you?" Su Shanshan sniffed, her voice choking with sobs. "Brother Jiang Long, you don't have much money, but you were so good to me." Seeing Su Shanshan in tears, Jiang Long was at a loss and quickly handed her a tissue. "Hey, don't cry." Susan took the tissue, wiped her tears, looked up at him, tears welling up in her eyes. "You were so good to me, brother Jiang Long." Jiang Long couldn't help but feel a little helpless. He patted her back gently and comforted her. "It's nothing. Since I took you in, of course I have to take care of you." Susan was even more moved, and she threw herself into Jiang Long's arms, crying even harder. Jiang Long was at a loss for what to do, so he patted her shoulder gently and comforted her softly. "Okay, don't cry. It won't look good if you cry anymore." Hearing this, Susan cried even harder, thinking Jiang Long was too bad at comforting people. After a long while, she finally raised her head from Jiang Long's arms, her eyes red, and looked straight at him and said, "Brother Jiang Long, you're such a good person." Jiang Long just smiled helplessly, but he thought the scene was a little funny. Seeing that her eyes were swollen, Jiang Long said with a smile, "Go wash your face. You become a little cat." Susan pouted, stuck out her tongue, and snorted. "Umph. Do you think I look good now?" Jiang Long paused deliberately, looked at her, and said teasingly with a smile, "It looks good." Hearing this, Susan finally felt better and walked into the bathroom with satisfaction. After washing her face, she walked into Jiang Long's bedroom with a quilt in her arms, looking a little hesitant. "Brother Jiang Long, can I sleep with you tonight?" Jiang Long frowned immediately and sat up suddenly. Susan had sneaked into his bed last night, but it would be inappropriate to do so again tonight. He patiently explained, "It's not good for us, a boy and a girl, to sleep in the same bed." Susan hugged the quilt tightly and whispered, "I don't dare to sleep alone." Jiang Long scratched his head, feeling a little helpless. Although Susan looked scared, they couldn't keep going like this. "How about I sleep on the sofa and you sleep on the bed?" Jiang Long compromised and prepared to get up and leave. Susan quickly stopped him. "I really don't dare to sleep alone." Jiang Long suddenly felt a headache, looked at Su Shanshan, and could only emphasize again, "Su Shanshan, it's really not good." "It's okay. We slept together last night. There's nothing wrong with that," Susan said, as if it was a matter of course, leaving Jiang Long speechless. Jiang Long said seriously, "You are a girl. This will have a bad influence on you." "I don't care. Besides, you won't do anything to me," Susan answered innocently. Jiang Long's mouth twitched, but he thought in his heart, "You are not afraid, but I'm a little afraid of you." When he woke up in the morning, the scene of Susan holding his arms in his arms was still fresh in his memory. Hearing Su Shanshan's soft plea, "Brother Jiang Long, please, I beg you, you are the best." In the end, Jiang Long sighed and compromised helplessly. Chapter 26. Could it be that she fell in love with Jiang Long? In the bedroom, Jiang Long and Su Shanshan were lying on the bed, one on each side. Compared to last night's nervousness and discomfort, Jiang Long was obviously much calmer tonight. After all, they had spent a night together in the same bed, so they were naturally more relaxed. After a whole day of work and a trip to the food court in the evening, Jiang Long was a little tired and soon fell into a deep sleep. But Susan was not sleepy at all. She curled up in the quilt, with her little head exposed, and watched Jiang Long's sleeping face quietly in the moonlight from the window. Jiang Long has long eyelashes and a high nose bridge. He looks quiet and gentle in his sleep. Susan's eyes involuntarily fell on his lips, which were slightly open and somewhat unconsciously soft. Her heartbeat suddenly accelerated, and a bold idea popped up in her mind. What would it feel like to kiss him? This thought made Susan swallow her saliva, and her cheeks quickly became hot. Why did she suddenly have such a strange idea? She quickly closed her eyes and tried to calm her heartbeat, but it was difficult to suppress the throbbing in her heart. Could it be that she has fallen in love with Jiang Long? She had never been in love before, and she didn't know what it felt like to like someone, but every time she faced Jiang Long, she would unconsciously want to get closer to him, and even had the urge to kiss him just now. This strange feeling made her confused, but she couldn't resist it. The next day, when Jiang Long woke up, he unexpectedly found his arm held by Susan again. But he was used to it and was not even surprised this time. He just gently pulled his arm out, laughing in his heart. This little girl really likes to hold me while sleeping. After arriving at the company, Jiang Long thought it was an ordinary day, but he met a surprising person in the conference room. Lin Tiange. She was wearing a Dior suit with big wavy hair and delicate red lips. She stood in the front and talked. Hello everyone, I am Lin Tiange. From today on, I will take over the company in place of Lin Yuxuan. I hope that in the days to come, we can work together and make progress together. Jiang Long's eyes flickered slightly. He originally thought that Lin Tiange was Lin Yuxuan's woman, but he didn't expect that she was his sister. Now that she has become the new boss of the company, Jiang Long is a little uneasy, not knowing whether this is a good thing or a bad thing for him. In the company president's office, Lin Tiange's face gradually darkened. She stared at the financial statements on the computer, her brows furrowed tighter and tighter. So much loss every month? Lin Yuxuan, this prodigal son. She cursed in a low voice in frustration. When Lin Yuxuan was determined to start this game company, she was strongly opposed. However, her parents favored their son and gave him a lot of financial support. As a result, this mess fell into her hands, and Lin Yuxuan had shifted his interest and wanted to start a film and television company. Oh, it's like a hopeless case. Lin Tiange laughed at himself, but a figure suddenly appeared in his mind. Jiang Long. A playful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. It seems that my days here will not be too boring. Not long after, Jiang Long received a notice and was called to the president's office. He stood at the door and said respectfully, Boss Lin, what do you want to talk to me about? Lin Tiange stood up from her seat and walked slowly towards him, her high heels making a slight click sound. She deliberately stood in front of Jiang Long, her arms folded across her chest, her charming posture showing off her proud figure. Jiang Long subconsciously looked away, feeling a little uncomfortable. Jiang Long, how long have you been in the company? Lin Tiange asked in a leisurely tone. More than a year. Jiang Long answered truthfully. Are you satisfied with your current income? She asked again. Quite satisfied. Jiang Long nodded. He had no complaints about his current salary. After all, it was already pretty good as he could go to work and get off work on time without the pressure of overtime. How old are you this year? Lin Tiange continued to ask, as if he had no intention of getting down to business. 22 years old. Jiang Long began to feel something was wrong. Lin Tiange's questions were obviously beyond the scope of work. Do the clothes I bought for you last time fit you well? Lin Tiange suddenly changed the subject. Jiang Long was stunned for a moment and nodded in response. But he had a vague feeling that Lin Tiange had called him here this time, and there was nothing serious to discuss. The next sentence made Jiang Long even more angry. Do you have a girlfriend? Jiang Long's face suddenly turned cold. He knew that this was no longer a normal conversation between a boss and an employee. His tone also became formal. This is my private matter. It is not convenient to tell Mr. Lin. Lin Tiange's smile froze slightly. Obviously, she didn't expect Jiang Long to respond to her like this. A hint of displeasure flashed in her eyes. Jiang Long, aren't you afraid that I will fire you if you talk to me like this? Jiang Long looked straight at her, his expression calm and neither humble nor arrogant. You are the boss. You have the power. I respect your decision. Lin Tiange's mood inexplicably improved after hearing this. This young man was not only a bit courageous, but also quite interesting. She raised her red lips slightly. Fire you? Oh, how can I bear it? Chapter 27. Since you are leaving, don't you even plan to tell him? After returning to his workstation from Lin Tiange's office, Jiang Long had just put his 10 fingers on the keyboard when his phone beeped. Jiang Long glanced at the screen and saw Susan's name, and he couldn't help but frown. Susan had never contacted him during his working hours. Did something happen? Jiang Long's heartbeat quickened slightly, and he quickly clicked on the message. Brother Jiang Long, where do you write novels? After reading this message, Jiang Long breathed a sigh of relief. It turned out that nothing had happened, but that the girl was interested in his novel again. Jiang Long couldn't help but smile bitterly, thinking that she must still be thinking about the novel. He deliberately hid his work in the most hidden folder on his computer, so Su Shanshan would never find it. As for those important learning materials, he was absolutely sure that no embarrassing incident would happen again this time. Jiang Long hesitated for a moment and replied with a question mark. Soon, Susan received another message. I want to read your novel. Jiang Long did not hesitate this time and typed quickly. You can download a tomato novel app from the App Store. There are many free novels in it. You can read them at will. Susan's reply was accompanied by a playful emoticon. Okay. At this time, in the rental house, Susan quickly downloaded the tomato novel app according to Jiang Long's instructions. She was curious and wanted to know what kind of novel Jiang Long was writing. At lunch, Jiang Long, David, and Su Fei gathered together for lunch as usual. David finally couldn't hold it in any longer and asked, Brother Long, why did the new beautiful CEO want to see you this morning? No big deal. They just asked me how long I had been in the company and whether I was satisfied with the salary, etc. These were the usual questions. Jiang Long said as he took a bite of rice. David was obviously not satisfied with this answer and asked, That's all? Anything else? Jiang Long thought for a moment and added, I also asked if the clothes I bought for me last time were suitable. David's eyes lit up with gossip, and he immediately looked at Su Fei and whispered, Old Su, do you think our new beautiful CEO is interested in Brother Long? Su Fei nodded while chewing his rice and replied vaguely, Yeah, I think that's a bit of the meaning. David then fanned the flames. Think about it. Why didn't the beautiful Su talk to us but Brother Long? Isn't this an obvious hint? Su Fei immediately agreed. Yes, Brother Long, you are lucky in love. Jiang Long looked helpless and said calmly, You think too much. I'm not interested in her. David did not give up and continued to persuade him. Hey, Brother Long, you have to think it through. Ms. Lin is so beautiful, rich and powerful. It would be a win for anyone, right? Jiang Long shook his head, his expression indifferent. I don't care whether she is interested in me or not. I am not interested. No way? Are you still obsessed with Chinya? David suddenly slapped his head, as if he had suddenly realized something. No, I let her go a long time ago. There was no fluctuation in Jiang Long's tone, and it was obvious that this topic was already in the past tense. David still teased unwillingly. What if Mr. Lin is really interested in you? You can't just let this opportunity go. Jiang Long smiled and said casually, Then go and follow her, I don't care. David immediately lamented. I would like to go along with her, but she doesn't like me, he said with a helpless look on his face. If I were as handsome as you, I would have been single a long time ago. Oh, I'm so envious and jealous. Everyone laughed, and the atmosphere became much more relaxed. In the afternoon, Jiang Long was working hard when his phone rang again. This time it was still a message from Susan. She was particularly active today, which made Jiang Long curious. When I clicked on the message, Susan sent me a screenshot and a message. The screenshot showed the cover of a novel titled Good Desire. Mr. Jean is flirted every day and can't stop, as well as its rating, introduction, tags, etc. Obviously, this is a novel for women. Su Shanshan immediately sent a message. Brother Jiang Long, do you also write this kind of novel? Jiang Long was stunned for a moment, then laughed and quickly replied, No, I write a male-oriented novel, which is different from this. Soon, Susan sent a new message. Male channel? Female channel? What's the difference between the two? Jiang Long patiently explained. Female-oriented novels are mainly for girls to read, while male-oriented novels are mainly for boys' tastes, but both men and women can read them. Susan replied quickly, Oh, I see. Finally, she sent a cute emoticon. I won't disturb Jiang Long at work anymore. I'll wait for you to get off work. Jiang Long chuckled and replied, Okay, then continued to work. Time passed quickly, and it was time to get off work. Jiang Long said goodbye to David and Su Fei and rode his electric scooter to rush home. However, when Jiang Long opened the door, the living room was quiet, Susan was gone, and even the usual sounds of cooking were not heard from the kitchen. Jiang Long stood at the door, looked around, and suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. Logically speaking, the sound of his entry was loud enough for Su Shanshan to hear. Could it be that she is gone? This thought suddenly came to Jiang Long, making him a little stunned. An inexplicable sense of loss rose in his heart. A picture flashed through his mind, just like picking up a stray cat, taking care of it for a long time, but it disappeared without a warning one day. This scene made Jiang Long feel extremely depressed. He took a deep breath and muttered to himself, "This little ungrateful bastard, didn't he even say hello before leaving?" Chapter 28, please put it on my stomach. Jiang Long changed into slippers, walked straight to the sofa and sat down. His eyes swept across the empty living room, and he couldn't help but feel a little dazed. The living room was still as quiet as before, but the silence now gave him a strange feeling of emptiness. It was like this before, one person, one living room, but since Susan appeared, this emptiness suddenly became unbearable. Where did she go? Jiang Long wondered. She had clearly sent him a message in the afternoon, saying that she would wait for him to get off work and come home. Why was she nowhere to be seen now? Did she have something urgent to do? But she didn't even leave a word. Jiang Long frowned, feeling a little disappointed. Just as he was about to put aside these messy thoughts and start typing, he suddenly remembered that there seemed to be some movement in the bedroom. Did she not leave? Jiang Long's heart tightened, and he walked towards the bedroom. He gently pushed open the door and saw a small figure curled up in the quilt on the bed, huddled up as if frightened. The exposed little head made Jiang Long feel relieved, and the feeling of loss just now was instantly replaced by a warm feeling. She's still here. He breathed a sigh of relief and walked closer with light steps. But when he took a closer look, his heart tightened again. Susan S.'s face was pale, her brows were furrowed, and her expression was painful. She had never looked so weak before. Jiang Long immediately leaned over, his voice full of obvious concern. "Susan, what's wrong with you?" Susan on the bed slowly opened her eyes and said in a weak voice, I have a stomachache." Jiang Long's heart tightened, and he quickly stood up. "I'll take you to the hospital." He reached out to help her in a panic, but Susan shook her head weakly and refused stubbornly. "No, I know the reason. Just take some medicine." "Are you sure?" Jiang Long was obviously worried. Su Shanshan nodded slightly, looking determined. Jiang Long was confused. He didn't want to force her, so he just said, "Okay, wait a minute, I'll go buy some medicine." After that, he hurried out the door. When he returned to the bedroom with the medicine and warm water, Susan's pain seemed to intensify. She collapsed on the bed, her face even paler. Jiang Long looked at her distressfully, poured the medicine into his palm, and handed it over carefully. "Susan, open your mouth and take the medicine." Susan barely raised her head. Jiang Long held her little head. She opened her mouth and swallowed the pill. Jiang Long felt her soft and moist lips gently touching the palm of his hand, and his heart was throbbing for no reason. Seeing her take the medicine obediently, Jiang Long was relieved. He settled her down again, tucked her in the quilt, and said softly, "Wait for the medicine to take effect, and you'll be fine in a while." Susan nodded tiredly, and suddenly, a flash of inspiration flashed through Jiang Long's mind. He quickly walked to the living room, found a hot water bottle from the cabinet, filled it with hot water, and returned to the bedroom. Seeing Susan frowning and closing her eyes, Jiang Long said softly, "Here's a hot water bottle. It will be more comfortable if you put it on your stomach." Susan groaned weakly and said softly, "Please put it on my stomach." Jiang Long's expression suddenly became a little subtle. He hesitated for a few seconds. His eyes fell on her fragile and curled body, and finally, he gently lifted the quilt and placed the hot water bottle in his hand on her belly. This brief action made Jiang Long's ears slightly hot. He retreated to the kitchen almost as if he was running away and took a big gulp of cold water. After a while, Jiang Long returned to the bedroom and saw that Su Shanshan no longer frowned and her breathing became steady. He finally put his mind at ease. Time passed quietly. Jiang Long was busy in the kitchen for a while, then returned to the computer and started typing. His thoughts flew along with his fingertips, but he felt the peace behind him in his heart, as if he had a responsibility to protect. Just when he relaxed for a moment and stretched, suddenly, a pink figure rushed out of the bedroom. Jiang Long was stunned and could hardly believe his eyes. "Is this Susan?" He looked back at the empty bed to make sure he was not dazzled. The next second, Susan's urgent voice came from the bathroom. "Brother Jiang Long, what's wrong?" Jiang Long responded and walked towards the bathroom. At the door, Jiang Long frowned and asked, "What do you want me to do?" Susan inside said in an awkward voice, "Well, could you please help me buy some things at the supermarket?" Jiang Long was stunned for a moment, somewhat puzzled. "What's so urgent that you want me to buy it before I even finish using the toilet?" Susan bit her lip and finally mustered up the courage to whisper, "I'm menstruating and need a sanitary napkin." Outside the bathroom, Jiang Long was petrified. He had never bought anything like this before, and after a moment's hesitation, he saw her predicament and couldn't bear to refuse. After a moment, Jiang Long finally made up his mind. "Okay, I'll go buy it." Chapter 29, Why Are They in the Same Bed? The lights in the supermarket were a bit dazzling. Jiang Long stood in front of the shelves full of sanitary napkins, and he was at a loss. His eyes scanned the shelves back and forth, as if he was facing an unsolvable problem. The supermarket seemed quiet, and Jiang Long was relieved. Fortunately, there were not many people at this time, but he didn't find the brand that Su Shanshan wanted. He squatted down and gently fiddled with the packages at the bottom of the shelf, as if expecting that familiar name to pop up suddenly. However, just as he was concentrating, a rustling sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Two young girls were walking towards this side, arm in arm, and their laughter suddenly stopped. When they saw Jiang Long squatting on the ground, their faces froze instantly, and their eyes widened as if they had seen something strange. "Pervert!" They looked at each other and ran away in opposite directions in tacit understanding. Jiang Long heard the hurried footsteps, turned around, and saw the two girls' backs getting farther and farther away. A hint of embarrassment flashed across his face. "Fuck," he muttered softly, his face turning pale. "You don't really think I'm a pervert, do you?" He sighed helplessly. This scene was really terrible. Finally, Jiang Long gave up looking for a specific brand, picked up a pack of other brands, and hurried to check out. Standing in front of the cashier, Jiang Long felt his ears burning red, as if he was afraid that someone behind him would recognize him. It was indeed a bit embarrassing for a man to stand here with a large bag of sanitary napkins. When he got home, he knocked on the bathroom door and said, "Susan, we don't have the brand you mentioned. I bought something else that should work." He put the things at the door and planned to leave this unsettling scene as soon as possible. Susan's weak response came from the other side of the door. "Yeah, thank you for your hard work." She quickly opened a crack, grabbed the bag with her hand like lightning, and quickly dragged it into the bathroom. Jiang Long stood there and returned to the bedroom with mixed feelings. He needed to calm down. Time passed slowly, and a few minutes later, Susan came out of the bathroom with an embarrassed look on her face. She walked to the bedroom door and saw Jiang Long sitting in front of the computer in a daze. "Brother Jiang Long, thank you so much for buying things for me." She spoke softly, seeming a little embarrassed. Jiang Long came back to his senses, smiled faintly, and waved his hand. "Nothing." Susan blinked, a sly look flashed in her eyes, and suddenly asked, "Have you ever bought something like this before?" Jiang Long was a little stunned and quickly shook his head. "I've never bought it." He was a little nervous inside. This kind of thing really made him feel very uncomfortable. Susan smiled lightly, her eyes a little naughty. "So you've never bought anything for your girlfriend?" "I've never had a girlfriend." Jiang Long answered as a matter of course, without a trace of emotion in his tone. Hearing this, Susan's eyes lit up immediately. Never had a girlfriend? This is a new discovery. Therefore, she was the first girl to let Jiang Long buy this kind of private product for her. Thinking of this, Susan felt a secret sense of satisfaction in her heart. However, she remembered the rainy night when they first met, and Jiang Long looked like he was emotionally hurt. So what happened to him before? Although she was full of doubts, Susan decided not to rush to ask the truth at this time. At this moment, Jiang Long suddenly interrupted her thoughts. "Does your stomach still hurt?" Susan shook her head. "It's much better now. It doesn't hurt anymore. Be more careful next time, and don't eat so many popsicles." Jiang Long thought of her painful look just now and couldn't help but remind her again. Susan pouted and explained unconvincedly, "I just ate 2 popsicles. It must be my period that caused the pain." "Do you like eating popsicles so much?" Jiang Long asked with a smile. "I don't particularly like it. I just feel greedy sometimes." Susan muttered softly, with a guilty look on her face. As the two chatted, a sudden gurgling sound broke the silence. Susan looked in the direction of the sound and couldn't help but cover her mouth and laugh. It was the sound made by Jiang Long's stomach. Jiang Long's face froze. He touched his stomach and said calmly, "It's hungry." Susan smiled so much that her eyes curved. "You haven't eaten yet?" Jiang Long nodded awkwardly. "Not yet. I was just taking care of you. Su Shanshan suddenly felt a little guilty and said regretfully, I'm sorry, brother Jianglong. It's all my fault that you didn't have a meal. Jianglong patted her head and said gently, silly girl, I haven't blamed you yet. You haven't eaten yet, have you? Are you hungry? Susan nodded, feeling that her stomach was indeed a little empty. Yeah, I'm a little hungry. Jianglong smiled and said, I just cooked some porridge. Let's go and eat. The two walked into the living room, where 2 bowls of steaming white porridge and a few plates of light pickles were placed on the coffee table. Your stomach is just fine. Drink some porridge to nourish your stomach. Jianglong said considerately. Su Shanshan was stunned for a moment and secretly glanced at Jianglong, and a warm feeling surged in her heart. When did Jianglong become so thoughtful? He actually prepared the porridge early and took her health into consideration. Night came quietly, and in the bedroom, the two of them lay on the bed, one on each side. As soon as Jianglong mentioned that he wanted to sleep on the sofa, Su Shanshan immediately grabbed his arm and said aggrievedly, Don't go. Since they slept in the same bed that time, there seemed to be a subtle tacit understanding between the two. Although Jianglong was a little uneasy, he couldn't refuse Su Shanshan's pitiful eyes. He didn't understand why things turned out like this. Obviously, there was nothing between them, but the habit of sleeping in the same bed every night became more and more natural. At night, Susan's body was cold due to menstrual cramps, and she unconsciously leaned towards Jianglong. She closed her eyes and gently approached Jianglong, like a cat looking for warmth, burying her face in his chest. Her hand unconsciously slipped into his clothes, and her cold palm pressed against his warm waist. Jianglong seemed to be entangled by an octopus and could not break free no matter how he struggled, until he gave up resistance in a daze and let the octopus do whatever it wanted. The early morning sunlight poured into the room through the gaps in the curtains. Jianglong opened his eyes drowsily, looked down, and almost cried out in surprise. Susan was lying in his arms, her palms pressed tightly against his waist, her face pressed against his chest, and her breathing evenly. Fuck! Jianglong's mind suddenly became clear, and his heart was filled with shock and shame. How could it turn out like this? He carefully removed Susan's hand from his waist and climbed up from the bed gently, trying not to disturb her. The moment he walked out, Jianglong finally breathed a sigh of relief. Susan, who was in the bedroom, slowly opened her eyes after Jianglong left. She was stunned for a moment, then shrank back into the quilt with a blushing face. How could I run into Jianglong's arms? Her face flushed red, her heart full of shame, but also with a little sweetness. She sniffed the smell on the pillow. It was Jianglong's smell, clear and pleasant. It was so embarrassing, but she couldn't help but smile secretly, and a sense of inexplicable pleasure surged in her heart. Chapter 30, Why Does the Stinky Brother Always Ignore Her? Jianglong arrived at the company. He was attracted by the box of exquisite chocolates on the table. Colleagues around him were talking about it, and excited voices were heard one after another. The beautiful president actually bought us gifts for the Chinese Valentine's Day. She is so generous, someone exclaimed excitedly. Yes, this chocolate is not just any chocolate. This brand alone costs 2 or 300 yuan a box, another colleague agreed. The beautiful boss is really generous. It looks like we single guys can also have a decent Chinese Valentine's Day, someone joked. Jianglong's eyes lingered on the chocolate box for a moment, and he felt a little emotional. He had bought this brand of chocolate before, and he always prepared a gift for Chinya at that time, but this year was different. The Chinese Valentine's Day was no longer a special day, but just an ordinary day. He smiled coldly in his heart, pushed the chocolate to the corner of the table, and then turned on the computer and started working. Not long after, a cell phone rang. Jianglong glanced at the screen and saw that it was an unfamiliar number. He hesitated for a moment, but finally answered it. Hello, he whispered. A familiar voice immediately came from the other end of the phone. Jianglong, come to the company gate immediately. It was Lin Tinga. His voice was cold and carried an unquestionable command. Jianglong frowned slightly, wondering when she got his phone number, but he was not surprised. After all, Lin Tinga was his boss, and it was not difficult to find his contact information. Jianglong sighed and responded, Okay, Mr. Lin. Then he stood up and left his workstation and walked towards the company entrance. As soon as he went out, he saw a red Porsche parked in front of the company. Lin Tinga, who was standing next to the car, was wearing a wine-red suspender dress, looking tall and charming. When she saw Jianglong approaching, she smiled, took off her big sunglasses, and raised her chin to him. Jianglong, help me move the things in the trunk to the office. Jiang Long's eyes flashed, and he muttered to himself, "This is such a small matter. It can be done by others. Why do you have to ask me?" But he still did it. As an employee, he naturally had no room to refuse the boss's order. Jiang Long followed Lin Tinga, carrying a heavy box. Looking up, her slender figure was particularly eye-catching under her red skirt. The two walked in unison towards the president's office, one in front and one behind. "Jiang Long, help me hang the clothes in the box in the closet in the lounge." Lin Tinga glanced at him casually and ordered in a relaxed tone. Jiang Long nodded, holding the box, and walked into the lounge. The moment he opened the box, Jiang Long's face changed slightly, and inside was a nightgown with very little fabric. "This nightgown is too cool, right?" Jiang Long smiled bitterly and shook his head. He picked up one of them and glanced at them unconsciously to confirm that they were really proper nightgowns and not something ambiguous. Soon, he hung up the nightgowns one by one and walked back outside after completing his task. "Mr. Lin, the clothes are all hung up. If there is nothing else, I'll get busy first," Jiang Long said politely, feeling that there was something strange about this matter. Lin Tinga smiled gently and deliberately walked slowly to Jiang Long, fiddling with the straps on her shoulders, slightly revealing more skin. She looked at Jiang Long with a half-smile. "Why, Jiang Long? You don't dare to look at me." Jiang Long's heart tightened, and he quickly looked away, saying calmly, "Boss Lin, you are wearing too thin clothes." "Really?" Lin Tinga's tone was somewhat teasing, "but I still think it's a bit hot." Jiang Long frowned slightly, feeling that his patience was reaching its limit. He said in a deep voice, "If Mr. Lin has nothing else to say, I'll take my leave first." Just as he was about to turn around and leave, Lin Tinga suddenly flashed in front of him with a mysterious smile on his face. "Why are you in such a hurry? I haven't let you go yet." As if by magic, a bottle of exquisite men's perfume appeared in her hand, and she handed it to Jiang Long with a smile. "This is for you, brother Jiang Long." Jiang Long looked at the perfume, and the feeling of uneasiness in his heart became stronger. He knew that Lin Tinga might have some special feelings for him, but this ambiguity made him feel uncomfortable. Without any hesitation, Jiang Long directly refused. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lin, I can't accept this." Lin Tinga still kept smiling. "This is your reward for helping me move things, take it." Jiang Long shook his head and said firmly, "No need. These are what I should do." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned and left. Lin Tinga looked at his back, frowning slightly. Looking at the perfume in her hand, the smile on her face gradually cooled, and she threw the perfume into the trash can. "Silly brother, am I really not attractive to you at all?" she muttered to herself, with a hint of unwillingness in her eyes. After work, Jiang Long rode his electric bike home. There were many more people on the road than usual. Obviously, the festive atmosphere today made the city seem particularly lively. He opened the door, and just as he entered the house, Susan, wearing pink pajamas, jumped in front of him with a sweet smile on her face. "Brother Jiang Long, you're back." Jiang Long nodded gently and handed her the chocolate in his hand. "It's given by the company. Have it." Susan saw the box of chocolates. Her eyes lit up and her heartbeat seemed to speed up. Did he remember that today was Chinese Valentine's Day and bought it specially? But when Jiang Long casually said that it was sent by the company, the sweetness in Susan's heart was instantly replaced by a sense of loss. Her smile froze slightly, but she still took it obediently. "Thank you, Brother Jiang Long." "Brother Jiang Long, I have already prepared dinner." Su Shanshan pretended to be relaxed and changed the subject. Jiang Long was a little surprised. "Didn't I tell you to wait until I come back before cooking?" "It's okay. The meal is ready. Go wash your hands and get ready to eat." Susan urged him with a smile. The two of them quickly sat in front of the sofa, and 6 dishes were placed on the coffee table. Jiang Long looked at these exquisite dishes and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He didn't expect Susan to make so many dishes, and each one looked delicious. She must have put a lot of thought into it. "Today is Chinese Valentine's Day. I want to make some special dishes." Susan glanced at Jiang Long secretly, her cheeks slightly flushed. While eating, Jiang Long accidentally noticed that Susan's little finger on her right hand was a little red and swollen, and his brows frowned instantly. "What's wrong with your hand?" Susan immediately clenched her chopsticks and smiled reluctantly. "Nothing. I just accidentally burned myself." Jiang Long put down his chopsticks and stretched out his hand seriously. "Give me your hand." Su Shanshan hesitated for a moment, but finally she reached out her hand and placed it in Jiang Long's palm. Jiang Long gently turned her fingers over, and saw that the burned area was red and slightly swollen, which made him feel distressed. He didn't say anything, but just carefully examined it, with a trace of concern in his eyes. Chapter 31, Can you lend me your shirt? Jiang Long carefully looked at Susan's slightly red little finger and frowned unconsciously. Does it still hurt? Susan shook her head and said softly, It doesn't hurt anymore. Wait a moment. Jiang Long responded in a low voice, then got up and left. After a while, he came back with the medicine box, took out the burn repair ointment, squeezed out a little ointment, and gently applied it to Susan's injured area. While applying the ointment, he muttered, It would be ugly if a girl's hand had scars. Don't be busy cooking in the evening. Wait for me to come back and do it. Susan nodded obediently. Yeah. Her eyes could not help but fall on Jiang Long's face, carefully sweeping across his trembling eyelashes, high-nosed bridge, sexy thin lips, and finally stopping at his big hands with distinct joints, which were applying medicine to her. His hands were so big and warm that they made people feel at ease. Susan's heartbeat accelerated involuntarily. After this little episode, it was already late. Susan looked up at the time, and it was almost 7 o'clock. During the day, she checked the news and learned that there would be a grand fireworks show on the beach tonight. For ordinary people, fireworks might not be a big deal, but Susan felt that if she could watch it with Jiang Long, it would have a completely different meaning. Brother Jiang Long, there will be a fireworks show on the beach later. Shall we go watch it together? Susan suggested with bright eyes. Jiang Long frowned slightly. What's so good about it? There must be a lot of people, let's not go. Su Shanshan immediately pouted and pulled Jiang Long's arm and said coquettishly, Brother Jiang Long, come with me. Let's go and take a look, okay? Jiang Long was reluctant. He could imagine that the beach on Chinese Valentine's Day must be crowded with couples. He and Susan were not a couple, so why would they join in the fun? Susan, the beach will be packed with people tonight. Why bother to join in the fun? Wouldn't it be more comfortable to stay at home? But Susan had already made up her mind to go watch the fireworks with Jiang Long, and she didn't believe she couldn't persuade him. So, Susan's coquettish offensive officially began. Brother Jiang Long, you're the best, please come with me. Her big eyes stared at Jiang Long without blinking, with an innocent expression. Brother Jiang Long, I really want to go and see it, she said coquettishly again, her eyes full of anticipation. Brother Jiang Long, you are the most handsome man in the universe. Please. After a series of coquettishness, praise, and various hard gestures, Jiang Long finally gave in and sighed helplessly. Okay, go ahead. Susan heard this. She smiled like a successful little fox. She quickly changed her clothes and walked in front of Jiang Long. She wore a short-sleeved white shirt on the upper body, a gray plaid pleated skirt on the lower body, black stockings on her legs, and a light makeup that made her look particularly fresh. Jiang Long couldn't help but stare at her outfit, especially her long black legs. This outfit was exactly the same as the night they first met. Su Shanshan deliberately turned around in front of Jiang Long, her pleated skirt lifted slightly, and asked mischievously, How is it? Am I particularly beautiful tonight? Jiang Long raised his eyebrows and responded in a moderate voice. Yeah, it's pretty. Su Shanshan curled her lips and stuck out her tongue. TSK, you are too perfunctory. Jiang Long chuckled, with a hint of fondness in his eyes. Susan put on her mask and cap again, and they went downstairs together. Jiang Long was pushing the electric donkey, and Susan took a look at it, feeling a little confused. Come up quickly. What are you standing there for? Jiang Long urged. Susan hesitated and bit her lip. Brother Jiang Long, can I sit sideways? Jiang Long immediately realized the problem. Susan was having her period, so it was obviously inconvenient for her to ride the electric scooter, and she was wearing a skirt. Jiang Long cleared his throat and said thoughtfully, It's not very convenient for you to ride the electric scooter in a skirt. Why don't you change your pants? Susan thought about it, shook her head, and refused. No, today is Chinese Valentine's Day. I must dress beautifully. Jiang Long was helpless and reminded, It's not safe for you to sit sideways. Once I start the car, your skirt will be blown up by the wind. Susan's cheeks flushed slightly, and she felt a little uncomfortable. She glanced at Jiang Long and suddenly thought of a good idea. She smiled and said, Brother Jiang Long, lend me your shirt. Jiang Long was wearing a white t-shirt with a black shirt on the outside. Seeing that Su Shanshan refused to change her pants, he had no choice but to take off his black shirt and hand it to her. Susan wrapped the shirt around her waist with satisfaction and finally sat sideways on the back seat of Jiang Long's electric scooter with her hands gently around Jiang Long's waist. Everything was arranged perfectly. They were driving on the road leading to the beach, but the traffic was much more congested than usual. Private cars and taxis were all stuck on the road, and the traffic was difficult to move. The drivers were honking their horns in frustration. Jiang Long drove, Su Shanshan, and easily passed through the gaps in the traffic. Brother Jiang Long, your electric scooter is amazing. It's simply invincible. Susan's little face smiled like a flower behind the mask. Jiang Long also curled the corners of his mouth slightly and continued to drive the electric scooter, moving smoothly in the crowded traffic. About 20 minutes later, they finally arrived at the parking lot by the beach. Jiang Long locked his e-scooter and led Su Shanshan toward the crowd. As expected, the beach was already full of people. Most of them were couples holding hands, and there were some vendors selling flowers and small gifts along the way. Jiang Long looked at the atmosphere, full of couples, and felt a little uncomfortable. He and Susan were not a couple, so he always felt out of place here. Suddenly, Susan disappeared in the surging crowd. Jiang Long looked around, his heart tightened, and he began to look for her everywhere. Sure enough, not far away, he saw Susan, who was also anxiously looking for him. Their eyes met across the crowd, and it seemed that at this moment, the noisy world had become quiet. Sushinshin, Jiang Long shouted. In the crowd, Susan immediately heard his voice, turned her head, and their eyes met again. Susan raised a sweet smile at the corner of her mouth. She waved her arms and ran towards Jiang Long. Jiang Long also took a step towards her, feeling a sense of security he had never felt before. They ran towards each other in the crowd, and every step seemed to shorten the distance between them. Chapter 32. Next time you watch it, call me and we'll watch it together. Jiang Long and Su Shanshan found each other again in the crowd. Su Shanshan immediately trotted to his side and said nervously, Jiang Long, I couldn't find you just now. I was almost worried to death. Jiang Long looked around. The beach was still bustling with people, and the mixed voices made it seem particularly lively. There are too many people here. We can be easily dispersed. Susan nodded and said with lingering fear, Well, there are indeed too many people. What should we do? Susan thought about it for a moment, and suddenly her eyes lit up. She suggested excitedly, How about, let's hold hands? That way we won't get separated. Jiang Long was stunned for a moment and hesitated for a second, but looking at Su Shanshan's expectant eyes, he finally responded softly, Okay. Hearing Jiang Long's agreement, Su Shanshan's eyes flashed with joy, and she quickly stretched out her hand, waiting for Jiang Long's response with full expectation. Just when Jiang Long's hand was about to hold hers, suddenly a passerby accidentally bumped into Su Shanshan's back. Ouch! Su Shanshan lost her balance and fell into Jiang Long's arms. Jiang Long reacted quickly and reached out to hug her tightly, his arms naturally wrapped around her slender waist. Susan pressed against Jiang Long's chest, clearly feeling his body temperature and strong muscles. Her heartbeat accelerated, and her chest seemed to be blocked by something, and her breathing became a little rapid. Jiang Long was also a little confused by this sudden attack. He paused for a moment, but quickly reacted. He gently supported Su Shanshan's shoulders and asked with a little concern, Are you okay? Su Shanshan shook her head, her eyes a little evasive, not daring to look directly at Jiang Long. The temperature on her face rose rapidly. Fortunately, she was wearing a mask, otherwise he would definitely notice something was wrong. Jiang Long held out his hand, and Su Shanshan also handed it over obediently. Finally, they held hands tightly and shuttled through the crowd. This time, their hands were tightly held together and would never be separated by the crowd again. After a while, Jiang Long found a place with a great view, where he could see the night sky clearly. As the fireworks bloomed, the night sky was instantly lit up, and the colorful fireworks bloomed on the dark sky, as dazzling as daylight. Susan looked up at the bright fireworks, with an unprecedented smile on her face. She had never thought that fireworks were so beautiful. In fact, what really made her feel that the fireworks were so special was Jiang Long beside her. She secretly glanced at Jiang Long, and a sweet feeling emerged in her heart. Jiang Long also looked up at the sky, but his thoughts went back to last year. He remembered that he had planned to watch the fireworks with Qinya on last year's Chinese Valentine's Day, but she rejected his invitation. Now, he unexpectedly saw this fireworks show with Su Shanshan. As the fireworks bloomed, couples around them began to hug and kiss, and the scene became more and more ambiguous. The couple in front of Jiang Long and Su Shanshan were no exception. They hugged each other intimately and kissed passionately. Susan couldn't help but secretly glance at Jiang Long. He pursed his lips slightly, and his eyes didn't stay on the couple for too long. Susan's eyes stayed on his lips, and she licked the corner of her mouth involuntarily. She suddenly became curious about what it would feel like to kiss. She had an urge to experience that feeling. At this time, Jiang Long slightly tilted his head, and Su Shanshan was so scared that she immediately turned her head away and pretended that nothing had happened. But her palms holding Jiang Long began to sweat, and she seemed a little nervous. Jiang Long looked down and found that Su Shanshan's palms were full of sweat. He couldn't help but frown slightly and asked softly, "What's wrong with you? Why are your hands so sweaty? Are you hot?" Susan nodded in panic, but didn't say anything. Jiang Long thought that maybe she was feeling a little uncomfortable, but he decided to hold on for a while and wait until the crowd dispersed before letting go. As the fireworks show ended, the once bustling beach gradually became deserted. Couples left one after another, and the beach that was originally crowded with people became much emptier. Jiang Long and Su Shanshan slowly loosened their hands. Susan felt a little disappointed. She actually didn't want to let go of Jiang Long's hand, but now she had no excuse to continue holding it. Jiang Long, aren't these people leaving too fast? Su Shanshan looked at the couples who were leaving quickly with some surprise. Yeah, Jiang Long responded indifferently, looking forward with a calm expression. Susan pouted and added to herself, "They seem to be in a hurry." Jiang Long glanced at her and said in a slightly relaxed tone, "They are indeed very anxious." Susan looked puzzled. "Why are you in such a hurry?" Jiang Long's eyes flashed with a hint of ridicule, and he asked meaningfully, "Today is Chinese Valentine's Day. Why do you think they are so anxious?" Susan understood immediately. Her face quickly turned red, and she whispered, "You mean they're going to do something shameful?" "Yeah." Jiang Long nodded slightly. Susan felt her ears getting hot and tried to look more natural, but her heartbeat inexplicably quickened. She forced herself to remain calm and couldn't help asking, "So where do you think will be packed tonight?" Jiang Long smiled and replied, "Of course it's the hotel." Su Shanshan pretended to be thoughtful and nodded, then suddenly pouted mischievously and asked, "Jiang Long, how do you know so much? Have you been to the hotel on Chinese Valentine's Day before?" Jiang Long quickly shook his head and said firmly, "I didn't." Susan snorted coldly and teased him deliberately. "Huh, you must be lying to me, right?" "I didn't lie to you, really," Jiang Long quickly explained, feeling helpless. Susan narrowed her eyes and pressed on. "You really didn't? You didn't even have the chance to do that kind of thing in a hotel?" Jiang Long looked at her helplessly and shrugged. "I don't even have a girlfriend. How could I do that kind of thing?" Susan pursed her lips, her eyes flickered, and continued to ask, "If you have a girlfriend, would you do that?" Jiang Long paused for a moment and answered seriously, "This kind of thing should be left to nature." Susan's face was slightly hot, and the topic became more and more bold. She couldn't help but continue to ask, "You don't have a girlfriend, so are you only able to read those study materials?" Jiang Long's face suddenly turned red, and his ears felt hot. He scratched his head and said in an awkward voice, "It's nothing, just taking a look." Susan couldn't help laughing when she saw him like this. "Ha, I didn't say anything. Why are you so anxious?" "I'm not in a hurry. Let's go." Jiang Long quickly changed the subject. He couldn't stand this topic anymore. The two walked slowly towards the parking lot, one in front of the other. The atmosphere was silent for a while. After walking for a while, Susan suddenly spoke again. "Are those things really that beautiful?" Jiang Long coughed dryly and tried to appear calm. "It's okay." Susan thought for a while and suddenly said seriously, "Then next time you watch it, call me and we'll watch it together." Jiang Long's eyes widened, and he was shocked by her words. He quickly shook his head and refused. "No, absolutely not." Susan looked at him in confusion. "Why not? You can watch it by yourself, so why can't you watch it with me?" Jiang Long said firmly, "No, don't look at those things. They are not suitable for you." Susan pouted in dissatisfaction. "Then don't watch it either." Jiang Long nodded helplessly. "Okay, I won't watch it." Susan stared at him and said seriously, "Don't lie to me." "Well, I'm not lying to you." Jiang Long smiled helplessly, but thought in his heart that this little girl was becoming more and more difficult to deal with. Chapter 33, She Wants to Kiss Again. Jiang Long and Su Shanshan were about to get their electric donkey when they saw an old lady unlocking her electric donkey. Next to the old lady was a large plastic bucket with only one rose left in it. Jiang Long glanced at it casually and thought that the old lady had a good business today, and this rose was the last one that had not been sold. The old lady also noticed Jiang Long and Su Shanshan at this time, and a gentle smile appeared on her face. She took out the rose from the plastic bucket, handed it to Su Shanshan, and said kindly, "Little girl, this rose is for you." The roses were so beautiful, with crystal drops of water hanging on their petals, which made them look particularly beautiful. Susan noticed that many girls were holding flowers or holiday gifts on the beach. The Chinese Valentine's Day was a time for lovers to give each other gifts. However, she was different from Jiang Long. They were not lovers, and Jiang Long had never given her flowers. Susan happily took the rose and smiled sweetly to thank the old lady. "Thank you, old lady." The old lady was all smiles, and the wrinkles on her face looked happy. "You're welcome. You're welcome." Then she turned to look at Jiang Long, with a meaningful look of concern in her eyes. She said to Jiang Long in an admonishing tone, "Young man, it's not easy to find a girl who can endure hardships with you. You must cherish her and try to make her live a good life." Jiang Long was slightly stunned, realizing that the old lady had misunderstood the relationship between him and Susan. She probably saw them riding electric donkeys and thought that he was not well off, so she said these words of advice. This kind of misunderstanding was not surprising on the Chinese Valentine's Day. Jiang Long was too lazy to explain, and just smiled and nodded. "Yes, I will." The old lady smiled with satisfaction, waved her hand, and rode away on her electric scooter carrying the empty bucket. Susan was a little excited by the aunt's misunderstanding. Jiang Long didn't refute her. He even said that he would cherish her. Does this mean he liked her too? Susan's heartbeat quickened, and all kinds of thoughts began to emerge in her mind. However, before she could think too far, Jiang Long suddenly poured cold water on her. "Don't think too much. Don't take what Annie said to heart. I'm too lazy to explain." "Oh!" Susan's smile faded instantly, and she felt a sense of loss in her heart, as if the bubble of expectation had been burst. Jiang Long unlocked his electric scooter and was about to put on his helmet when Su Shanshan suddenly grabbed the helmet and said with a smile, "Jiang Long, let me give you a ride." Jiang Long raised his eyebrows and asked doubtfully, "Can you ride it? You've only ridden an e-scooter twice. Are you good enough?" Su Shanshan patted her chest and said confidently, "Don't worry, I have a driver's license and can drive. Riding an electric donkey is nothing." Jiang Long wanted to refuse, but seeing Su Shanshan's determined look and the helmet already on, he could only sigh helplessly. "Okay, Su Shanshan, I'll leave my life to you." Susan laughed, took off her cap, put it on Jiang Long's head, and then put on Jiang Long's black helmet. She excitedly sat on the electric scooter, holding the handlebars with her hands, and tied Jiang Long's shirt around her waist, looking quite professional. Jiang Long reluctantly sat on the back seat and steadied himself. "Okay, we can go now." Su Shanshan suddenly turned her head, her eyes rolling around under the helmet. She smiled and grabbed one of Jiang Long's hands and put it directly on her waist, saying half-jokingly, "Jiang Long, you have to hold your other hand tighter too." Jiang Long frowned slightly and wanted to say something, but seeing Su Shanshan's nonchalant look, he could only sigh and put his other hand on her waist. Su Shanshan's waist was very slender and soft, with a warm touch, which made Jiang Long feel a little uncomfortable. Soon, the electric donkey started. The road was much emptier at night than before, and the car drove smoothly. Along the way, Susan's long hair fluttered in the wind, and a few strands of her hair occasionally brushed Jiang Long's face, making him itchy, but he couldn't say anything. Arriving at the door of the rental house, Susan took out the rose and handed it to Jiang Long with a smile. "Jiang Long, happy Chinese Valentine's Day." Jiang Long was stunned for a moment. When he saw the rose, he felt a little strange. His expression froze, and he asked, "This is a gift from Andy. Why did you give it to me?" Susan smiled and said softly, "It's mine now, and I want to give it to you." Jiang Long frowned even deeper. "We are not lovers. You don't have to give me flowers." Susan gently shook the rose in her hand, her voice soft but firm. "Who says that only lovers can send flowers? We are friends. There is nothing wrong with me giving you flowers." Hearing her say this, Jiang Long sighed helplessly and could only take the rose and said politely, "Thank you." Susan was delighted. This was her first time giving someone a flower. Even though it was just a pitiful rose, she was very satisfied to be able to give it to someone she loved. She watched Jiang Long put the rose into a vase and then put it on the computer desk. She felt extremely happy. Jiang Long looked at the rose, and a slight smile appeared on his lips. He didn't expect to receive a gift on Chinese Valentine's Day. Although it was just an unexpected rose, this moment made his heart soften. At night, the rental house became quiet. Jiang Long slept soundly, but Susan tossed and turned, her heart full of excitement, and she couldn't fall asleep. She secretly glanced at Jiang Long, who was sleeping on the other side of the bed, and an unspeakable impulse surged in her heart. Jiang Long carefully got very close and stared at his face quietly. Jiang Long's outline was particularly soft in the dim light. His nose was high, and his lips were thin and soft. Susan couldn't help but stretch out a finger and gently slide it across his nose, whispering softly, "What a straight nose, it's like a slide." Her fingers slid to Jiang Long's lips and touched them gently. They were so soft, just as she had imagined. Just as her heart was beating fast, Jiang Long suddenly moved in his sleep. Susan was so scared that she quickly withdrew her hand and lay back on her bed. Her heartbeat quickened and her cheeks became hot. A few minutes later, Susan found that Jiang Long still hadn't woken up, and her heartbeat surged again. She moved closer to Jiang Long again, staring down at his lips so close, her heart beating faster and faster. She closed her eyes, hesitated for a moment, and gently pressed her lips against Jiang Long's. This kiss is like a dragonfly touching the water. It ends with a light touch. Susan's face instantly turned red. She covered her mouth, her heart full of excitement and shyness. She finally kissed Jiang Long. Her heart was full of sweet joy. However, before this sweet feeling completely dissipated, another thought suddenly popped up in her mind. How about kissing again? Thinking of this, Susan couldn't help but sneak over and kiss Jiang Long's lips again. Chapter 34. It's so small and pink, but it's pretty powerful. In the early morning, the warm sunlight shone through the curtains onto the small bed, and the air was filled with a peaceful atmosphere. Susan rubbed her sleepy eyes and slowly sat up. Her eyes fell on the empty space beside her, and she sighed softly. It seemed that today would be another day without seeing Jiang Long. Her thoughts could not help but drift back to last night. While Jiang Long was sleeping, she kissed him twice. Thinking of this, Susan's face instantly turned red. She couldn't help but blame herself in her heart. How could she do such a thing? She knew he was still sleeping. How shameful. But on second thought, Susan felt a hint of sweetness in her heart. Maybe it was because she liked Jiang Long too much that she couldn't control herself and did such a thing. She was lost in thought when she heard a familiar voice interrupt her thoughts. "Are you awake? Come over for breakfast." Susan was startled by the sound. She turned her head sharply and looked at the bedroom door in shock. Jiang Long was standing there with a calm expression. She stammered, "Why are you home?" Jiang Long looked at the flustered Su Shanshan on the bed, raised the corners of his mouth slightly, and explained lightly, "Today is Saturday. I have a day off." Susan suddenly realized what was going on and scratched her head shyly. "Oh, so that's how it is." Jiang Long smiled slightly and said jokingly, "Why? Don't you want me to be at home?" Susan quickly retorted, "No, that's not the case. I'm so happy. How could I not want you to be at home?" She wished she could be with Jiang Long every day, even if they couldn't be separated for 24 hours a day. Jiang Long's smile deepened, and he said in a relaxed tone, "Then get up and have breakfast." "Well, okay," Susan replied with a sweet smile on her face. Meanwhile, Chinya was not so happy. Last night, she had been waiting for a call or message from Jiang Long, but her phone remained silent until late at night. In previous years, Jiang Long would always contact her in advance and prepare everything for the festival, but since the KTV incident, he seemed to have never contacted her again. Chinya was very disappointed with Jiang Long's indifference, and she became more and more dissatisfied. Did he really not plan to contact her? Thinking of this, Chinya's heart sank, and she picked up her phone angrily and directly blocked and deleted Jiang Long's phone number and WeChat account. Putting down her phone, she called her best friend and said with a hint of impatience, "Yaya, come out and go shopping with me." In the Lin family's villa, the four members of the Lin family had a rare dinner together. While eating, Father Lin asked casually, "Xiaoxian, how's the new company going?" Lin Yuxuan leaned lazily on the chair, looking nonchalant. After swallowing the food in his mouth, he only uttered two words, "Not bad." Lin Tinga on the side snorted coldly, with a mocking tone in his voice. "Humph." Lin Yuxuan immediately raised his eyebrows in dissatisfaction and glared at Lin Tinga. "Lin Tinga, why are you being so weird again?" Lin Tinga calmly put down his chopsticks, his eyes indifferent. "I didn't say anything. You think too much." Lin Yuxuan suddenly became angry and gritted his teeth and said, "Don't think I don't know what you mean." Lin Tinga shrugged and said lightly, "I didn't say anything. It's up to you to think whatever you want." The tension between the two people was getting stronger and stronger. Seeing that the atmosphere was about to get out of control, Lin's mother hurriedly came out to smooth things over. All right, both of you stop arguing. Tinga, you should say less. Your brother has finally come back. Don't bother with him." Lin Yuxuan proudly raised his chin towards Lin Tinga, as if he had won something. Lin Tinga felt disdainful, but she didn't refute anything. She had long been disgusted with Lin Yuxuan's dandy style. She couldn't stand Lin Yuxuan's lazy attitude all day long. Her father was clearly planning to hand over the Lin group to this idle prodigal son. Sooner or later, the Lin family's business would be ruined in his hands. The dinner was not very lively, and the atmosphere was a little depressing. At this moment, Father Lin suddenly said thoughtfully, "I don't know where Ning Ning is now." Lin Tinga paused his chopsticks. His expression instantly became serious, and Lin Yuxuan couldn't help but frown. In the Xia family manner, Xia Nuanyuan lay leisurely on a chair, her fingers swiping quickly on the screen of her mobile phone. She was wearing a light blue Lolita dress, her legs wrapped in white silk stockings, a lollipop in her mouth, and she was watching short videos with a satisfied look on her face. In less than a few minutes, she had quickly swiped through hundreds of videos on the screen. However, Xia Nuanyuan's expression suddenly changed, and her originally smiling face suddenly showed a trace of sadness. She couldn't help but sigh. Susan had been away from home for several days. Where did her good sister go? Suddenly, her eyes lit up, and an idea flashed through her mind. Jiang Long was sitting in front of the computer in his bedroom, typing away at the keyboard with a blank expression. Time passed quietly, and after several hours, he finally finished his work for the day. Jiang Long stretched his body and opened the drawer of his computer desk, ready to look for something. Suddenly, he saw 2,000 yuan lying quietly in the drawer and was stunned. This money was secretly left by Su Shanshan. When Jiang Long came out of the bedroom, he saw Susan curled up on the sofa and had fallen asleep. She was wearing a black t-shirt and denim shorts, with her two long white legs crossed and exposed to the air, looking particularly attractive. Jiang Long couldn't help but keep his eyes on her leg for 2 seconds, then shook his head and turned to get a quilt from the bedroom. He leaned down gently, intending to cover Susan with the quilt, but at this moment, Susan suddenly stretched out her legs, and her pink little feet accidentally kicked Jiang Long in the face. Jiang Long was stunned for a moment. When he felt the close contact between his face and her little feet, his head tilted back slightly, but he quickly stabilized his body. He rubbed his red face and smiled helplessly in his heart. This little girl's feet look small, but she is quite strong. When it was time for dinner, Jiang Long woke Su Shanshan up. She rubbed her eyes and got up from the sofa, looking annoyed. "I was planning to cook with you, but why did you sleep so soundly?" While eating, Su Shanshan suddenly noticed a red mark on Jiang Long's face. She quickly reached out and touched it, and asked worriedly, "Brother Jiang Long, what's wrong with your face?" "It's okay," Jiang Long said calmly, pretending to be relaxed, and stepped back. He didn't dare tell Susan that it was her kick, otherwise she would definitely misunderstand that he had ulterior motives. Seeing Jiang Long avoiding her, Su Shanshan pouted and muttered in dissatisfaction. "Even if you don't let me touch you, I still want to touch you." As she spoke, she moved closer and gently touched Jiang Long's face. Jiang Long felt helpless, but he did not avoid her anymore. He just said, "Okay, stop making trouble and eat." Susan then realized that her actions were somewhat intimate, and her cheeks flushed, but she still refused to admit defeat. "Jiang Long, your face is so smooth." As she spoke, she gently pinched Jiang Long's face, as if she was evaluating a work of art. "Your face is really elastic." "Not bad." Jiang Long looked at her speechlessly. "Stop playing and eat quickly, or the food will get cold." Susan then reluctantly put down her hand and started to eat obediently, but her heart was still filled with ripples from the intimate gesture just now. Chapter 35, An Unexpected Surprise. The tenderness he silently guards. After dinner, Susan suddenly pulled Jiang Long and said she wanted to go for a walk. The two changed their clothes and were about to go out. At the entrance, Susan put on the pair of black shoes that she had worn for a long time. Jiang Long's eyes quietly stayed on the shoes for a second, thinking. Susan walked out of the house. She found that Jiang Long did not take her to the direction of their usual walk. She asked curiously, "Jiang Long, aren't we going for a walk? Where are we going?" Jiang Long pretended to be mysterious, with the corners of his mouth slightly raised. You will know in a while. Susan was full of doubts. She did not ask any more questions and just followed him quietly. After a while, the two stopped in front of a shoe store. Jiang Long pushed open the door and walked in. Welcome. Would you like to choose men's or women's shoes? The salesgirl came up to us enthusiastically. Women's shoes. Jiang Long answered calmly, then turned to Susan. Take a look and choose a pair you like. Su Shanshan was stunned, and then she realized that Jiang Long brought her to buy shoes. She shook her head quickly. No need to buy. My shoes can still be worn. Jiang Long's expression became more serious, and he whispered, You only have this pair of shoes. Change a few pairs to wear. This pair of shoes is very good. You really don't need it. Susan explained hurriedly. Jiang Long had long known that she was worried about his money. Thinking of her action of secretly returning the 2,000 yuan in the drawer that day, he was slightly moved, but on the surface he pretended to be indifferent and said, It doesn't cost much to buy 2 pairs of shoes. Do you want to choose by yourself? Or let me help you choose? Seeing that Su Shanshan still didn't move, Jiang Long directly said to the clerk, Please choose 2 pairs of size 36 for her. I choose it myself. Su Shanshan quickly interrupted him, but a sweet feeling welled up in her heart. She didn't expect Jiang Long to remember her shoe size so clearly. She walked around the store and finally picked out a pair of simple white shoes. After trying them on, she looked up at Jiang Long and asked for his opinion. How about this pair? Not bad. Jiang Long nodded, speaking calmly. Susan frowned when she heard this comment. She took off her shoes, picked out another pair, put them on, and asked him again, What about this pair? Jiang Long took a quick look and found that there was no big difference between the 2 pairs of shoes. But he knew that Susan was always very concerned about these small details, so he didn't say it directly but pretended to be serious and commented, I think the first pair is better looking. Hearing this, Susan's smile suddenly spread. I also think the first pair looks good, so let's buy that pair. Jiang Long nodded but suddenly added, It's just one pair, buy another pair. Susan came closer to him and chuckled. I really don't like the others, so stop trying to persuade me. Seeing her insistence, Jiang Long had no choice but to give up, and after paying for her, the two walked out of the shoe store. At this moment, Jiang Long's eyes suddenly fell on the helmet store next to him, and his eyes lit up. Let's go over there and take a look. Susan was stunned for a moment, then reacted. Are you going to buy me a helmet? Jiang Long nodded and said calmly, Yes, if you don't wear a helmet, don't even think about riding my electric scooter next time. Although Susan always felt sorry for Jiang Long's money, she felt it was necessary to buy a helmet this time. After all, safety issues cannot be ignored. Moreover, she was happy to have more excuses to hold Jiang Long's waist openly. She blinked her eyes and smiled playfully. Who said I refused? I want a helmet. You must buy it for me. Jiang Long chuckled, walked into the store, picked out a pink helmet, and handed it to her. How about this one? Susan looked at the helmet in front of her and thought it was cute. She nodded and smiled. It looks good. Help me put it on and try it on. Do you need my help to put on the helmet? Jiang Long's mouth twitched. Of course, help me, Susan said coquettishly. In desperation, Jiang Long helped her put on the helmet himself. When his fingertips touched her soft hair, he couldn't help but feel confused. Why was her hair so soft, while his own was so hard? After putting it on, Susan winked playfully. Does it look good? Jiang Long looked at it carefully and said truthfully, It looks good. Is the helmet prettier, or am I? Susan asked with a wicked smile. Jiang Long paused for a moment and whispered, You. Susan suddenly took off her helmet and pretended to be dissatisfied. So you mean the helmet doesn't look good? If it doesn't look good, why did you ask me to buy it? Jiang Long took the helmet and explained softly. You are a person, and the helmet is an object. They're not comparable. A helmet is just a decoration on the shelf, but if it protects you, then it becomes meaningful. Susan couldn't help but chuckle after hearing this. It was beyond her expectation that Jiang Long could say such a philosophical thing. She smiled and said, Then buy this. Jiang Long nodded, feeling slightly relieved, and walked out of the store with Su Shanshan. Looking at the pink helmet on her head, the corners of his mouth slightly raised. Turning his head, he saw Su Shanshan staring at him with a smirk on her face. Jiang Long, I just like what you chose. Chapter 36. Ambiguity. Unconcealable heartbeat. After coming out of the helmet store, Jiang Long and Susan walked side by side on the street in the night. They were about to go home when they were stopped by a middle-aged woman in front of a pharmacy. The woman was wearing a white coat and holding a small box in her hand. She handed it to Zhang Long with a smile on her face. Young man, this product is now buy one get one free. It's a great deal. Take advantage of the promotion and buy a few more boxes. I guarantee you two will be able to use them for a long time. The older sister sold enthusiastically. Zhang Long looked down and blushed instantly. It turned out to be that kind of thing. Has the pharmacy business reached this point? He quickly shook his head and refused. No, thank you. Just as he was about to leave, the middle-aged woman suddenly stood in front of him, blocking his way. Young man, if you don't think about yourself, you have to think about the girl next to you. You two are so young. Haven't you decided whether to be parents? Raising a child is not easy. Enjoy it while you are young. Don't be too impulsive. Zhang Long didn't know whether to laugh or cry. God knows he and Su Shanshan weren't in a relationship at all. So how come she even arranged for a child? He was about to explain, but Su Shanshan suddenly blushed and spoke first. Sister, let's buy a box. Zhang Long turned to look at Su Shanshan in shock, unable to believe his ears. The little girl is sensible. The middle-aged woman became even more excited. How can one box be enough? It's safer to have this stuff in stock. What if you run out of it for emergency use one day, and you still have to take medicine, which has serious side effects and is not good for your health? Susan's face was almost red. She thought buying a box would end the embarrassment, but she didn't expect the elder sister to get more excited. She forced a smile and said, Sister, buy a box first and try it. If you feel better, come back. Okay, let's go and pay. The elder sister nodded with satisfaction. Zhang Long reluctantly paid. The middle-aged lady reminded him. Young man, remember to love your girlfriend. This matter cannot be sloppy. Zhang Long took the bag expressionlessly and walked out of the store. He looked down at the two boxes in the bag, then glanced at Su Shanshan with a puzzled tone. Su Shanshan, you didn't explain and took the initiative to buy this kind of thing. What does it mean? After a pause, he raised his eyebrows and added, Are you really going to use it with me? Susan's face flushed red instantly, and she was too embarrassed to look him in the face. She punched Zhang Long in the chest and said coquettishly, Bad Zhang Long, what nonsense are you talking about? After saying that, she trotted to the front quickly, trying to get rid of the embarrassment. Zhang Long followed her slowly and continued to tease her. If you don't plan to use it, why did you buy it? Can you explain it? Susan pouted and replied unhappily. Last time, the lady who gave me roses misunderstood us, and you didn't explain. I thought I could leave quickly after buying them. But who knew she would keep talking? Zhang Long smiled and said, Oh, then deliberately said, But you bought them all? Wouldn't it be a waste if you don't use them? Bad Zhang Long. Su Shanshan was embarrassed and angry, staring at him. How could you be like this? Zhang Long shrugged innocently. What's wrong with me? You. Susan was at a loss for words and stamped her feet anxiously. I don't want to pay attention to you anymore. Zhang Long laughed and looked at her. You can ignore me, but what are you going to do with this bag of stuff? Susan covered her ears, pretending not to hear, and ran quickly back home. After returning home, Susan gently placed her pink helmet next to Zhang Long's black helmet. Looking at the two helmets side by side, she felt an inexplicable sweetness in her heart. At night, Zhang Long took a quick shower and fell asleep, but Susan tossed and turned in bed. She couldn't help but think of the sales pitch made by the middle-aged lady during the day, as well as Zhang Long's deliberate teasing. Her cheeks began to heat up again. She secretly approached Zhang Long, looking at his peaceful face while sleeping, her heart beating faster and faster. Her eyes fell on his lips, and she suddenly had the urge to kiss him. Calm down, Susan. You can't be so rude. She encouraged herself frantically in her heart, and finally suppressed the impulse in her heart, turned over, and fell asleep. However, she knew that she could no longer ignore her feelings for Zhang Long. The next evening, when the two were walking again, a kitten suddenly ran to Zhang Long's feet and meowed. Zhang Long leaned over and gently stroked the kitten's head, saying with emotion, Kittens also like to be touched. It feels so good. Susan squatted down, touched the kitten's belly, and smiled brightly. It's so cute. I like it too. Looking at the warm scene in front of him, Zhang Long's heart suddenly felt a little soft. He whispered, Susan, maybe one day I can really take good care of you. Chapter 37. Her sudden move overwhelmed me. Zhang Long took Su Shanshan in. She secretly remembered everything he did for her. This man was not only good to her, but also very kind to small animals. The two played with the little cat for a while, but no one came to claim it. Jiang Long guessed that the cat might be a stray cat, so he said to Susan, "You stay here and watch it. I'll go buy it some food." Susan was so engrossed in playing with the cat that she responded without even looking up, "Well, go ahead." Soon, Jiang Long came back with a few sausages in his hand. But what he saw was not the kitten, but Su Shanshan, who looked aggrieved. Jiang Long's heart tightened, and he asked quickly, "Where is the kitten? Did it run away?" Susan pouted and said aggrievedly, "Someone was walking his dog just now, and the big dog barked. The kitten was scared and ran away and never came back." Her tone was full of loss. Jiang Long walked over, patted her shoulder gently, and comforted her. "Don't be sad. Maybe it will come back tomorrow." "Really?" Susan looked at him expectantly. "Well, anything is possible," Jiang Long said casually. Susan pouted in dissatisfaction, obviously not believing his words. The two continued to walk back, but her pace was obviously much slower and she was in a low mood. Walking into the corridor, Su Shanshan suddenly stopped and turned to look at Jiang Long, her eyes full of helplessness. "Jiang Long, do you think the kitten will come back?" Jiang Long was silent for a while, then hesitantly answered, "I don't know." "Where will it go then?" There was disappointment in her voice. "Maybe it will go to find its companions or family members." Jiang Long deliberately emphasized the word family members, and his eyes unconsciously fell on Susan's face, trying to capture her reaction. She had lived here for a while, never mentioned her home, and never showed any desire to go back. Jiang Long didn't know how long she had been away from home, but he was worried. Her family must miss her very much. In fact, Jiang Long bought her a mobile phone in the hope that she could take the initiative to contact her family, but so far she seems to have only used the mobile phone to contact him, and there is no trace of any other contacts at all. Thinking of this, Jiang Long couldn't help but feel some complicated emotions. He couldn't tell whether he hoped she would return home soon or was afraid that she would really leave. Humans are social animals, and he had become accustomed to the existence of this girl, and even began to look forward to her company somewhere in his heart. Susan heard the word family. Her face stiffened. Jiang Long noticed this and sighed inwardly. Just as he was about to speak to break the silence, he suddenly took out a sausage from his pocket, handed it to her, and said jokingly, "This sausage was originally bought for the kitten, and now it's cheap for you. Do you want to eat it?" Susan waved her hands again and again. "I don't want it. You eat it yourself." Jiang Long jokingly shook the sausage in his hand. "Really? Then I'll eat it." Susan nodded, with a teasing smile in her eyes. "Eat it. Eat more." Suddenly, the scene she read in the novel yesterday came to her mind. The hero handed the heroine a sausage, and the heroine peeled it with a smile and stuffed it into the hero's mouth, and even joked like Cures-like. The hero was furious on the spot, feeling that he was being ridiculed. Susan's face flushed instantly, and she felt as if she had been led astray by these novels. How could she have thought of such a thing? It was so embarrassing. Jiang Long saw her face suddenly turn red, and was about to tease her a few more times when he saw Su Shanshan suddenly stop and stare at him with her big eyes, serious and persistent. "Jiang Long, I'm still a little unhappy. If you promise me one thing, I'll be happy, okay?" Her tone was a little coquettish, as if she was expecting him to agree. Jiang Long frowned slightly, and a bad feeling came over him. "You didn't even tell me what it was. How could I agree to it?" "Don't worry, it's a very simple thing." Susan nodded confidently. Jiang Long stared at her suspiciously, still wary. "Really? Real? Okay, go ahead." Susan's lips curled up into a sly smile. "Squat down." Jiang Long felt puzzled, but he still did it. Unexpectedly, Susan suddenly jumped on his back from behind, hooked her hands around his neck, and said in a sweet voice, "I will be happy if you carry me home." Jiang Long froze instantly. Her body pressed against his back, and a soft touch made his Adam's apple roll up and down involuntarily. Now what should he do? The little girl suddenly jumped on him, and he was totally unprepared. Su Shanshan urged, "Jiang Long, hurry up." Jiang Long looked a little embarrassed. "You'd better come down. It's not very convenient." "What? Are you weak and can't carry me?" Susan asked provocatively with a wicked smile. Jiang Long gritted his teeth, suddenly stretched out his hands to hold her thighs, carried her steadily on his back, and walked upstairs. 5 floors is not high, but when he carried her upstairs, a thin layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. Not because of tiredness, but because the touch of her skin made him inexplicably nervous. Finally reaching the door of the house, Jiang Long put her down, and the first thing he did was to rush into the bathroom to take a shower, as if he wanted to use cold water to quench the heat in his heart. It's hot, so hot, he muttered to himself. Chapter 38, A Qualified Former Suitor Should Be As Good as Dead. Hi everyone, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share. If you like this story, please let me know in the comment section. I will update the next part.